Morena, and good morning everyone, and welcome to the council meeting of Monday the 20th of May 2024. My apologies for lateness. As you can see, we've got a lot of papers in front of us today, and in fact it's quite a significant day for us all. I do want to compliment the staff. This is the last major decision-making day for the Commission. So I do want to compliment the staff because I know that they have been doing a lot of work to make sure that all the papers land here. There will be one final meeting on the 10th of June for the Commission, but the instructions that we have given is that we don't want to be making any major decisions on that day. It's not appropriate because we will be well and truly into electioneering for the incoming council. So today is it. So welcome everybody, and I see there's a lot of staff here. We'll try and get through the day as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can. So a reminder about health and safety. If the alarm sounds, we go out through the back door and assemble over the road from this building and await further instructions from staff. The meeting is being live streamed and will be publicly available on YouTube. And a reminder to everyone to turn their phones either off or onto silent. Can I ask you to open the karakia for us, Shad, please?
Tēnā koe, Anne. Māti tātou katoa ko hitahi nei, I tēnei ata, I tēnei hui huinga, me ki rai ngā huatanga i ngā take I mui a tātou I tēnei rā. Huri ake rā, ngā whakaaro ki a rātou kua mene nei te pō, pērā o ki a Bill Nepia, me ki rā I tōna whānau, no reire tarangatira haere. Hoki atu rā ki a tātou tēnā koutou katoa. Just firstly, I just wanted to acknowledge Bill Nepia, who passed away last week. His son is Chris Nepia, Carlo's equivalent at Western Bay District Council, who was a strong supporter, I think, of the Commission and the work that we've been doing over the last 3.5 years, alongside Ngai Tamara Awa. So I just wanted to mention him briefly. Nō reira, me te mata hoki rā tātou, tēnei hui huinga, nō reira kia noi tātou. I te atua, anei rā mātou huitahi nei tēnei ata. Toro mai rā tō ringa kahakiringi a mātou, hei āwhina nei, hei tohutohui nei a mātou roto I nei mahi. Te tumanoko, ko te wawata hoki rā, kia whai hua rahi tika rā tātou katoa, I roto I ui nei whakataunga. Nō reira, te atua tēnei mātune, tēnei kia koe, korori ki taunga tapu. Āmene.
Thank you. Thank you, Shad. So we have no apologies, everyone's here. We have no one in the public forum. We have 3 late items. We have 2 in public and 1 in public excluded. So the 2 in public are the commitment to and funding of transport investment to enable housing supply and Cameron Road Stage 2 in Urban Transformation Project. And the 3rd paper, Cameron Road Stage 2 procurement progression for detailed design, is in public excluded, obviously for contract reasons. Would someone like to move that we accept those late items? Please. Thanks, Bill, and Shad seconded. Any discussion on those? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. That brings us, oh, I see. So if I turn the page, it's all there. Recommendations. Okay. So we accept the following tabled items and accept the reason that they're late. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. There's none at this stage. Change the order of business. We might have to change. There's nothing on the table at the moment, but we may well have to change the order through the day. There's a couple of items that the Commission are still working their way through, and so we might want to change the order at some stage. Just give notice of that. That brings us to the minutes of the 25th of March. Is there any discussion? I was just going to ask, I don't know whether we've got anyone here, but that meeting was about Egret Ave and Tamutu Crescent. I know we got some funds from the central government, and there's a timeline on that. I just wondered, can we have an update on how we're going with that? Is there anyone that can bring us up to date?
Yeah, we've got Phil here, although I I met with Phil on Friday. So in terms of the 3 properties we're
Glasses on there might be able to see
proposing
who's in the
to
room.
buy out, we're in the process of negotiating those settlements at the moment. In relation to making good the property, it looks like we can initiate some early works to tidy up the Egret Ave side of things, and then we're also looking at some designs for just addressing that TOMO and holding that bank secure. So we believe that we can achieve the works within the timeframe that will enable us to access those funds.
Okay, all right. Okay, because it's just that when we were there with the minister, we did promise the other residents that we would get on with tidying up the street, and so it looked less like a disaster zone for them.
Thanks, Chair. Kevin Kingston's our project manager, working on that now. He's met with contractors early on and had a discussion with Jeff Farrell as well around proposed mitigation works, the plans. I'm expecting he's just on leave now for a couple of weeks, but he's expecting to be able to get on with the tidying up of the water and removal of the fences in the early stage to get some progress underway, and he'll be to have on his return.
And did we clarify whether demolition costs were included, or that funding from central government was able to cover demolition costs?
We've tried several times to get that included. Unfortunately, they've knocked us back on that. Main reason for that was the separation between Category 2 and Category 3 funding. So of the 3 properties that we're going to be acquiring, they'll fall into Category 3, but that doesn't include funding for the demolition costs for those properties.
What about the restitution funds? I can't remember if it was 5 or 7 million. Does that include demolition?
No, that's in the local government flood resilience funding. So those are for Category 2 works. So we did try to get a bit of a hybrid of that where we could cover those costs, but other councils are also seeking funding from that fund, which has nearly been exhausted.
All right, thank you very much. That was all I had. Anything from anyone else? Someone like to move that those minutes are a true and correct record? Stephen and Shad, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Any conflicts of interest to declare? Bill?
Thanks, Chair. I just would like it recorded that in respect of item 13.4, in terms of the Western Corridor Specified Development Project, my daughter and son-in-law have a property in the Keenan Road growth area.
Thank you very much. Shad?
Sorry, just in relation to item 11.7, around the asset realisation, property 140 Grange Road has reserve status on it. I'm currently a member of the New Zealand Conservation Authority. Just want it recorded. I suppose my interest. I don't have a decision-making interest in it,
but it's wise just to note it. Yep. Thank you. Nothing else? Okay. There's no deputations, presentations or petitions. That brings us to recommendations from other committees, and we have the item 10.1, the Matapihi Southern Pipeline Advisory Group recommendation that we receive the report and adopt their recommendations about meeting frequency and changes to the quorum. You want to talk to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to move it as well. So the Matapihi Southern Pipeline Advisory Group was set up in response to the spill that occurred, I think, in our first year of the Commission, and that was to work with the community to resolve some of those issues. Within Matapihi, things like odour, access to infrastructure and that kind of thing. We've resolved, I think, all of those issues, but there is still a desire from the Matapihi community to stay connected, particularly as the pipeline goes through their community. And when we did meet last week, the intention is to keep the group going, but to change the frequency of the meetings. At the moment, it's every quarter. So to reduce that to twice a year, just to receive wider updates around the network as the city continues to grow. And then also the quorum. We've had issues trying to meet the quorum requirements. So I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Okay, shared. Bill, second. I don't think it's good to have those discussions, but the point needs to be made that the pipeline goes through a large number of communities. So we should be prepared then that other communities might also want to have the opportunity to talk with council as the city continues to grow. Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against carried. Thank you. That brings us to Fidore Marae, who's going to speak to this. Carlo. And Dana and Phil.
Morena kia tātou, matua ake e mihi ana kia koe shed nau I whakatūwhera tō tātou hui, o tira kia tātou katoa. Just a brief introduction just to open up. Most of the detail is there in the report, but open to questions. But I did want to first and foremost put in the apologies of Josh Gear, who was going to speak on behalf of Whariro this morning. Bill Napier that she had acknowledged this morning is his uncle, his mum's brother. So he's been waylaid with that and it's ongoing. So he gave me a call this morning. And I just want to acknowledge Ngāti Kuku, Ngai Tūkairangi and Whareroa. They've been talking to us about the impacts on their community for a long time. And I think we've seen the emotions intertwined with that over the years. But they have come forward now with something that they believe is within council's control. And I want to acknowledge the commissioners as well. I know you've been out and visited that community a number of times. And I know it's difficult when challenges are put to council and to commissioners that are beyond our control. And I know we've investigated thoroughly what we would be able to do as opposed to what might address a lot of the problems that are there. For Whareroa, as we know, it's pretty well detailed, the impacts that have grown in and around them. Some of them have been from decisions that council have made. Some of them have been by decisions that Crown's made. Some of them have been decisions around them as well. So I think they have been in quite a desperate situation. So to have something come forward that's solution orientated, I think is really encouraging. And I think as staff have been looking into it, I think there is a pathway that we can follow to play a part to help out in that area. And just want to acknowledge that a lot of those impacts have been to the benefit of the ratepayer and to the general citizen. So if we team up on solutions, I think there's a way forward. Kia ora tātou.
Chair, if I could just acknowledge the work of Dana Leslie on this paper as well. It's been a power of work engaging with mana whenua and working with the Takawainga unit. Brought a good paper for discussion this morning. Thank you.
Say anything? No? Okay. Look, first of all, I want to say it is a really good paper and I think it's really well set out. So thank you very much for that. And Carlo, you sort of took all the comments that I was going to make. I think since the Commission's been here, we've met and talked with Ngāti Kuku and Ngāi Tūkarangi on a number of occasions, both at the marae and in other forums as well, about the future of Whareroa. And I think most people understand the difficulties that they are facing that are essentially unresolvable. And we've looked into every possible avenue. So we sought legal advice about the status of existing consents. We have looked at the planning processes. So we've made as much, done as much in that avenue as we can with the port industrial area study and the spatial plan for the Mount To Arataki, and that work will continue. But at the heart of it, we can't we can't actually stop the weather in the end. And that's really the hardest challenge I think that Whareroa faces, is that it is inevitable. They're facing it already with quite severe weather events. We know they're only going to get worse with what's happening with our climate. And so it's really good, I think, that we're in a position where we can start talking together about what the long-term solutions are. And the opportunity is there on part of their rohi, part of their original rohi. I saw some of the effects of Cyclone Gabriel on significant Māori communities, where one in particular at Tongo, they have nowhere else to go. There is no other land in their rohi that they could possibly go to. So it was good to find a place for Whareroa that they could consider future-proofing for them. And I think the paper sets it up. There's a lot of discussion still to go, both with Whareroa itself and the two hapu involved, but and also with the airport and our partners in the airport. But somewhere in there will be a solution, and it's really good that we could bring that to a conclusion before we leave. So, thank you very much. I think a lot of work's been done in a relatively short period of time. Really appreciate it. I'm happy to move it. You second it? Yep, shared.
Kia ora. Just want to support the comments that have been made. I think from the time the Commission started, this is, I think for Bill and I, we attended the Mount Air Quality Working Group, and this particular issue was kind of front and centre. I mean, particularly for Bill and I, we're aware of the issues with Whareroa in the Mount Industrial area, and it's been a challenge for them for a long time, as Ian's indicated. But I suppose in a way this provides an opportunity at some point in the future for them to determine what a managed retreat solution might look like for them. And I think that needs to be led by them. And I think that the recommendations today provide that opportunity, that in principle we will potentially set aside a piece of land that they may use at some point in the future. I think it's also important to recognise that Whareroa is important, not just to Ngāti Kuku and Ngāi Tūkarangi, but actually to the whole of Tauranga Moana. Most of our iwi and hapu have some connections, whakapapa relationships to Whareroa, and so the retention of that land, I think, is still primarily important. So it's not take this away and we'll give you this, it's actually retain that and find another solution where you may at some point in the future want to access and utilise. So I think it gives that flexibility and the potential for those conversations to continue. They are challenging conversations to have. I mean, Anne mentioned about the Hawke's Bay. Even for those communities down in the Hawke's Bay, you've got 50-50 who want to move and the other half don't want to move. So these are ongoing conversations that our communities, and particularly for Māori communities, will continue to face, particularly those communities that are subject to climate impacts like Whareroa. And we do have a number of other similar communities in Tauranga Moana. So I'm happy to second the motion, but I also want to acknowledge the leadership from Whareroa Marae and from the hapu, Ngāi Tūkarangi and Ngāti Kuku.
Anything else? No? Yeah, no, it's I'm sorry, I should have acknowledged particularly the Marae Committee that have led this conversation, and that shows great leadership, because as Shad says, these are hard conversations to have, and they will continue, because this isn't a move. This is starting to talk about what the future could look like when the marae itself is ready. So that's the test of true leadership, isn't it? When you can look further out and have those conversations and be prepared to put yourself on the line to make it happen. Okay, I'll put that then. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks very much. Tauranga local water done well, preferred structure.
Morena tātou. So by way of introductions, one of the early actions from the coalition government was to revoke the water reform legislation. Since then, we have been looking at a broad range of options under the local water done well direction from the coalition government. And now we need to focus our efforts and do some more detailed work on where we think we'll get the best gains for Tauranga City and its community. So we have identified 5 key objectives and a preferred option which we think best meets those objectives. So we've got Kathy and Stephen here to talk to that and answer any questions.
Morena, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you again. Possibly before we kick off, I just wanted to acknowledge the Commission and all the clear direction you've given us over the last few years. It's been a tough time in the water space. The 3 water reforms create a lot of uncertainty across the country, but also we've shifted away to the new local water done well. And all along this way, you've given us your clear direction. We've never been boxing shadows. We've known exactly what we need to be focusing on. So thank you for that. Our last time was on the 29th of April that we came to you on the initial local water done well direction, which you gave us. Since then, there's been some large announcements in Auckland and in Wellington. We've looked at what's going on there. They're quite different. And there will be several other different things being looked at across the country, whether it's 2 waters or 3 waters, whether they can grow an organisation like Watercare or disestablish a Wellington Water. There's a lot of options there. But we're quite clear on what we're trying to achieve from a funding and financial perspective for the city, but also to ensure that we meet the local water done well requirements. The recommendations here are a refinement on that those resolutions of the 29th of April and building on them. We're happy to answer any questions on that. I think there was just one thing, it was probably implied, but it has been omitted in this. And I'll ask Kathy to just speak to that, if I may.
Order. Yes, we just wanted to recommend adding in another recommendation on the paper. We felt as we were doing the iwi relationship a disservice by not spelling out that we have been engaging with them throughout this state of unknown, this big vacuum of information. So we met with them on the 18th of April with Tauranga. The only thing was that there was no quorum at that particular meeting, so it wouldn't have been a minuted meeting. But we wanted just to clearly lay out that will be form part of our really important steps of moving forward with local water done well. So we wanted to make a recommendation to add in to say that our discussions will include and connect with iwi and hapu of our district.
Thank you. I was going to ask about that because we have been lockstep with them all the way through. Okay.
And iwi have also expressed that they would like to again do joint, any feedback to legislation, etc. They would like to do joint responses back.
Okay. Okay. So, anything else? No. Look, I think we're all expecting that the legislation, the Minister is outlining the legislation coming up. So the next piece of legislation that we're expecting to see in the House, probably at the end of this month, early next month, probably after the budget, I would say, will require councils to have that water plan to the Minister by July 2025, which would outline the way forward, whether we're going to go on our own, whether we're going to go in a group or whatever, and start identifying the financial sustainability and how we're going to meet the standards, etc. So that's probably for the incoming council going to be one of the very early decisions that they're going to have to make, is to get on and prepare that water plan, even probably before they've got their feet under the table comfortably, because the timing is just against them to get that done. So really appreciate the work that has gone into getting us to where we are today. It makes sense to me that we are lockstep with both our mana whenua, but also we have a service agreement with Western Bay, so it makes sense that we continue to work together with that group to develop a plan, an operational plan that could be stood up as a CCO. As I've made clear to my fellow mayors at the Bay of Plenty Mayoral Forum, that is positioning ourselves, but there's nothing precluding that, including other councils as and when they're ready. Because the reality is, even in the nationally, but even in the Bay of Plenty, the councils are at different places in their relationship, their conversations with their community, but also with their revenue streams and their thinking around where they want to go. So made it very clear that although work is being done on a Bay of Plenty option for a CCO or some mechanism, that we were working with the Western Bay and that was our preferred option. But that wouldn't necessarily be exclusive, although we're nowhere near thinking about how others might join, et cetera, yet. So just want to make that point. And that doesn't preclude us from continuing discussions with Hamilton, another big metro, although again, they don't have metering, so they don't have a ring-fenced revenue stream yet, although I know that they're talking with their community about it. So for me, it makes absolute sense that we get ready. We have a model that we could stand up. We do have the ability to ring-fence our revenue. Whether it's 2 waters or 3 is quite a big decision for the council to have to make, and we haven't come anywhere near exploring that in any depth. So I think this is the right way to start the conversation and get this ready to go, which will be of great help, I think, to the incoming council, rather than having to start from scratch. So that's my views on it. And at the back of my mind, I'm very conscious of the loud signals from our community that they did not want to lose the ownership of the waters, that they felt they had invested in the asset over years, and we know that the investment has been made in Tauranga's water assets, and that they wanted to retain that ownership and that sight line of ownership, which the previous government's entity B didn't have. So what you're presenting meets all of those tests, makes sense, doesn't commit the incoming council, but prepares the work for them to make those decisions that they're going to have to make. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to move the recommendations with the addition that has been recommended. Totally agree with your comments. I think this presents an opportunity where water in Tauranga and the Western Bay can be set up effectively as an independent utility with the ability to charge consumers for a service which will then provide the backing for the debt that organisation raises. One of the key benefits of that is that debt which currently sits on the council balance sheet will shift to that independent CCO. Now that is really important because many of the decisions we had to make around the long-term plan were constrained by our debt ceiling. Freeing up the waters debt and putting that in an independent utility that is run by a professional board to deliver good outcomes for Tauranga City and the residents of Western Bay as well means that we can not only guarantee good water services but also free up council balance sheet to be able to invest in some of the very major infrastructure investments that are needed to enable the city to grow. So I think in concept, this is the right thing to do. Certainly my preference would have been that the scale of operation would be larger than what we're contemplating. But one of the good things about this recommendation is it does enable collaboration and future consolidation of other councils into a model like this. The reason for that is the question of scale is really important in water service infrastructure delivery. And the entity that we're talking about setting up here potentially improves scale marginally on what we have now. But if it had a much larger scale, then there are considerable benefits around A, the size of the balance sheet, B, the revenue streams that come through, and really important, the availability of skilled and professional staff to run these organisations. At the moment, all the 64 councils across the city and the 12 regional councils are competing with one another to find talented and capable staff to come in, and scale enables consolidation of that expertise and makes a huge difference. And we know right across the infrastructure sector that the availability of talented people is one of the most significant risks that we face. But notwithstanding the fact that the scale might not be as big as we'd like it to be, this is a good model to start with. And I do hope that the other councils and our neighbouring councils across the Bay of Plenty see the benefits of collaboration and direct pricing of consumers and balance sheet separation, and we'll think about joining in due course. So I'm very happy to support the recommendations and move them. I think it's a very positive step forward for Tauranga.
Oh, yes, Chair, and then Bill, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow on from those comments as well. I think it sends a clear signal to the incoming council, council's intention to collaborate and work together, particularly with Western Bay, as we have been working with them over the last 3 or 4 years on their joint services agreement. I do want to pick up on the point earlier as well about the partnership, and that was one of the focuses, I think, of the Commission when we first started, about making sure that we were working in tandem with our iwi and hapu in particular. I think as we move through in this in a CCO kind of model along with Western Bay, we do need to make sure that we're, because it's now sub-region wide, we need to make sure that we're working in tandem with all the iwi and hapu across the sub-region, including our partners in the east, and we have been working quite closely with them through the Waiari. So we do need to make sure that we're aligned and joined. Well, we've been enjoyed support in terms of the direction that the Commission set. There is a bit of work to do with our sub-region iwi and hapu.
You seconding?
I am seconding.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Just a couple of additional comments, Chair. And I'm certainly supportive of what's proposed, and particularly that CCO model, because when we went out and sought feedback from the community, which must be well over 18 months ago, there was a very clear message in terms of the retention of local ownership of the water entity, whatever that may look like. So I think this proposition before us actually certainly upholds and gives effect to that feedback. And I think picking up Stephen's point in terms of scale and that, certainly councils are at different stages of thinking, whether it's in the Bay of Plenty or the Waikato. And I think over time, though, some of that realisation will come to the fore. And I think one of the drivers of that will be the struggle that some entities have, council entities, of actually getting the relevant expertise. So whilst it might take a bit longer, I think over X period of time, that realisation will tend to hit home, and the ability to actually have a Clear Waters entity who can actually employ the right staff to deliver on those services.
Okay, so look, thank you very much. Just talking of staff, it has been, I think probably it'd be fair to say that the last three years have been pretty hard on staff. The uncertainty for staff working in waters has been great. It's not over yet. But certainly here in Tauranga, the investment's been made. We know that the water assets that we have are in a good state, in a very good state. And that's down to, that's probably the best investment that previous councils have made, and the terrific staff that we've had looking after our waters. So appreciate that's still not a clear pathway, but we're hopefully getting started. Okay, nothing more. I'll put the recommendation is we receive the report, note those key objectives for the development of a water entity, continue to monitor the legislative developments for the establishment of water entities, approve the preferred option of establishing a CCO with Western Bay of Plenty District, and establish a project team to prepare the organisation for the joint delivery of 3 water services across Western Bay. We will continue to investigate those structure options involving other councils. That's notably Bay of Plenty and Hamilton. Note that options may include either 2 or 3 waters. Investigate opportunities for volumetric wastewater charging, because the legislation doesn't allow that at the moment. And then the added recommendation that we continue involving our iwi and hapu in all the discussions that we're having. So that's been moved and seconded. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks very much. Right. 15th Ave to Welcome Bay. Ooh.
So the purpose of this paper is to ask for your endorsement to for the scope for the single stage business case, which we will put up in June. We've made a split in the project and divided it into 2 stages to what we believe better aligns with a new draft government policy statement. And we've got Jason, Derek and Neil here to talk to the paper. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, Commissioner Tully. This paper we just want to take as being read on 15th Avenue, Turret, Welcome Bay. The project is about relieving congestion, as you know, improving travel times and improving public transport and walking and cycling facilities across the Harini Bridge and along Turret and 15th Avenue. I just want to introduce Derek again. Derek, as the SPM, is going to just run through the recommendations. Thank you.
Marlena, I'll just introduce Matt Soper, who's from Stantec, our business case consultant. He's on the call as well. As Jason has said, the objectives of this project are to relieve congestion along a Turret Road, 15th Avenue, and across the Harini Bridge and Causeway. The project relieves congestion, improves travel time, but also has the benefits of significant improvements to public transport and walking and cycling infrastructure along that route. The project economics are strong. They're driven primarily by travel cost savings and vehicle operating cost savings. However, there are significant benefits from the walking and cycling aspects of the project as well. Pre-implementation of this project has already occurred as the council has approved budget in an earlier council meeting to ensure that we can start construction in the middle of next year as per the current long-term plan requirements. So that funding, as you know, is 100% council funding because we are starting pre-implementation before we expect the council or the Waka Kotahi to approve the project in October next year. The business case before you today is supported by the completed executive summary. Unfortunately, at this time, we've not been able to complete the full business case. And what we will do, obviously, is complete that. And within that business case, we'll include a full and robust costing for the stormwater treatment costs for the project. Now, regrettably, given time pressures, we've not been able to submit those to you in this business case, but we'll do that in the final complete business case. And also we'll give an assessment of the potential for funding allocation from Waka Kotahi for those costs as well. We propose conditions on the council's approval of the business case, and that is that the chief executive subsequently approve the final business case for submission to Waka Kotahi. Obviously, that NZTA would approve the project and the business case and the requested funding. Further condition is that implementation of the project would not start until we've got a full and robust forecast cost to completion following receipt of construction tenders, and that appropriate funding is obviously allocated to see the project through to completion. So the council is requested to approve the completion of the pre-implementation stage and move to implementation of the project subject to those conditions which I've just run through now and are in detail in the project in the paper that you have before you. So we're happy now to elaborate on any aspect of the project and take questions. Thank you.
Very much. I realise that in getting this to us, you've made a shift with the stages. So you might just need to, there's a couple of things in the paper that maybe have slipped through. For instance, page 40D, what is it? 42D, oh sorry, it's 42F. It's proposed to procure the contractor for zones 1 and 3. Surely we're not going to be contracting anyone for zone 3 at this stage. Am I right that zone 3 is in stage 2? Is that right?
So yes, if I could explain that, it does get a little bit complicated with stages and zones.
Yes,
unfortunately,
it did get very complicated.
The project, as we originally set out, was in 4 zones, and zones 1 and 2 are in stage 1, and zones 3 and 4 are in stage 2. Obviously, we're not doing much of what is in stage 2, but we are doing a small aspect of the interventions in zone 3, which was the roundabout at James Cook Drive and Welcome Bay Road.
Oh, okay.
So that might explain that.
Right, okay.
Apologies.
So it's not for the whole of zone 3, it's just for the part of zone 3.
Correct.
It's coming from stage 2 into stage 1, right. Okay, and then on para 49, you've got a recommendation E4, but I haven't got a recommendation E4 to address the shortfall.
Apologies, this paragraph 49, is it?
Yeah. Shortfall is addressed by recommendation E4, and I haven't got an E4 in the recommendations.
Let me have a look at that.
Meaning
That should be C4.
Right,
Apologies,
okay,
yes.
okay, yep, that makes sense, good. Okay, so then my last question is, in recommendation B2, you're talking about the 2025-2035 long-term plan approval of sufficient funding. We haven't got a 2025-35 long-term plan. It should be 2024-34 long-term plan.
Correct, yes.
I know it might seem like you're doing 2 years' work in one. Okay, look, this is a really important, critical project for the city, and anyone who looks at Turret Road knows, or goes down that 15th Ave to Burrows knows the congestion that is there in peak hours must drive people coming from Ohawiti and Welcome Bay and Mangatapu, must drive them crazy. So it's really good that I think 2 things. we're not giving up on the stage 2 part. That cycling and walking safety is a critical part. I don't think we should just confine it to transport's low risk. What is it? Low cost, low risk, because it might be spaces and places get involved as well. So it might be a combination of funding and community funding from some of the organisations that are being so generous with us, because that also has. I mean, it's great to have projects that have a BCR of over 1, and in this case of 3. They're pretty rare, and we shouldn't walk away from them. But the pivot to make sure that this business case gets through the process by making sure that it meets the draft GPS is absolutely critical for the city. So thank you for doing that, and that you haven't completely dropped the important stage 2, because I think we've been very clear. We see the need for this whole project, but we've just got to try and fund it in different ways. Other than that, yeah, Bill.
Happy to move, Chair. I just had a question around the pavement rehabilitation costs, which are not insignificant, but the commentary in para 7 notes they're not eligible for co-funding. I just wanted a wee bit of background on that. Thanks, Derek.
Yes, we have obviously asked NZTA whether that's a potential, but they have been quite clear that that's not eligible for co-funding. They're not actually a requirement of the project. They don't necessarily are required to deliver the benefits that the project is going to be based on, that they'll be basing their funding on. They are more of a business as usual renewal cost for TCC, and that's why they're quite clear that that's not part of it, would not be considered for co-funding.
Short of money. Thanks, Stephen. Okay, any further discussion on this? Shan.
Just another point of clarification as well. The HOV, the high occupancy vehicle lanes, is there timing around that or staging of that, or is it from day one they'll be implemented?
I might actually ask Matt, who's on the call, who has been doing the modelling and been doing some thinking about that. I mean, that is certainly an option, and it may be something that needs to happen just to sort of condition people to drivers to the fact that we've got tidal lanes and we've got HOV lanes as well. So, Matt, have you got any further thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's right, Derek. And I think generally, flexibility is kind of what this project is delivering. We can introduce T2 right at the start, or it can start with general traffic. I think there's probably a question that will go into the next phase, and obviously with the change in the GPS, that might need a bit of reflection. So yeah, I mean, on day one, if they operated it as general traffic lanes, things may look quite smooth, but fundamentally we're trying to drive that mode shift in the long term. So I guess it's still it's an open question, but the system will be flexible to allocate those lanes as TCC want.
Just on HOV lanes, just interested in who makes the final decision on the implementation of those and whether they are T2 or T3. Is that totally TCC, or is this NZTA part of that decision making?
The modelling that Matt and his team has done has clearly demonstrated that the benefits that the project is relying on at the moment are based on T2. That going to T3 at the moment would not generate that level of benefits. We've been through this. Regional Council has been part of our project control group, and accept that they would like to go to T3, I guess, quite soon, but accept that might be a transition in time. So, Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Bay of Plenty are obviously quite keen to go to T3 or even bus lane at some point in the future. But there are a variety of different trigger points in terms of, you might need to increase the number of buses along the route, or might be some parking policy. It's a bit of a balance between trying to get as many people through the corridor, but also managing the kind of wider effects.
But I don't think you've answered Bill's question as to who makes the decision.
It'll be TCC's decision. We'll be recommending in the business case that it goes to T3, but based on the fact that the economics that we're presenting the business case on are reliant on that being T3. So that will be the recommendation. And if Waka Tahi accept the recommendation and fund on that basis, then it will be TCC's ability to, effectively our instructions will be to create T2 loans, target T2 loans.
So just, sorry, so the paper says starting as T2, but you said that it would be starting as T3.
Sorry, if I said T3, sorry, I meant T2.
Right, start as T2.
Yes,
yeah. Okay. Do we need to note in here that you are going to be including I don't know how you describe it, the line, the bus, the access to the bus lane down from Hyrene in this? So we've got two parts. We've got one as a short term, but when we spoke last, you were going to include it in the planning so that we manage that traffic. Do we need to make a note in here?
I think it'd be entirely appropriate to do that. That's something that Matt and the team are working on at the moment for inclusion in the business case, the options and evaluation of opening up that lane.
So we want to add into, the mover and seconder happy to add in an M, which notes that the current bus lane from Hyrene will be included in the business case for use outside of peak hours. I think, is that what we're talking about?
Correct. We're looking at investigating those options and coming up with a recommendation in the business case.
Okay, so you're happy to add that? Thank you. Okay, anything else? Shad?
Sorry, just on the HOV thing, I think, and picking up the points that have already been made, I think it's great that we need to provide flexibility in the system. That I mean, my view was that we start off with open lanes and then work towards T2 and then potentially T3. I think just trying to get community informed about how we travel and how we move through the city. But I think having that flexibility, I think, in the system, I think is really important.
Okay.
I'll just respond on that, Chad. The implementation of a new system will require a lot of education. We'll keep that as a staged implementation. We don't want to have lane selection and changes in the network making it overly complicated. So just first of all, understanding that the users will have to remember which lane to be in and follow the new signal systems. We'll keep it simple at the beginning and then put more and more criteria around that as we implement.
Right. So the recommendations are: we receive the report, approve the stage 1 pre-implementation activities, and then approve that stage 1 of the project moves from pre-implementation to implementation activities under the management of Council's major projects unit. And there's some conditions there, noting the pre-implementation and implementation phases for stage 2 will come under the management of Council's low cost, low risk, or other program with allocated budget. Approves stage 1, irrespective of whether the bridge abutment strengthening is approved by Council, and that's coming to us on the 10th of June. which will give some longevity and resilience. Delegates authority to the Chief Executive to approve the submission of the final business case, single stage business case to NZTA, and that's only because it's now changed to stage 1 with a little bit of stage 2 in it. Noting that the business case will only request funding, co-funding for the stage 1 amount that's been outlined. Noting there's scope, cost and funding uncertainty still with stormwater treatment requirements, and it says in this recommendation that an update will be given to the council on the 20th of May, so that's today.
Apologies, I should have included that. So we've done some work over the last couple of weeks on this. We're still trying to close that out. That at the very top end, the additional costs are 13 million. So that's at the very, very top end. They will come down as we optimise those as we go through the parallel peer review process of that. And obviously we'll be looking at funding options. So it's something we've talked about with Wakotahi in terms of funding. There is a real potential that they can co-fund that as well. But it's we regret that we're not being able to give you certainty on these things at the moment, but they'll be closed out when the final business case is submitted.
So we'll just take out that the words in parenthesis there. So we're noting that if the abutment strengthening is approved, it could affect the program as outlined in the attachment. Noting that we approved the pre-implementation works in February 2024 to the value of 3.5 million. And noting that the final business case is expected to be completed in June, and accepts the risk that if the actual costs exceed the estimates, then they're not fully covered by NZTA cost scope adjustments. Council will have to fund 100% of the shortfall. And we've been cognizant of that all the way through. But this project is critical for, the further development of Ohauiti and Welcome Bay and Mangatapu, and relieves serious congestion in the city. So it's a critical project, and we've accepted that there is always a risk that we might have to carry those costs. And then finally, we've added that noting that current bus lane down from Haireni will be included in the discussions in the business case for possible public general use outside of peak hours. All right, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? There's a lot in that, but it's a big project for the city. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Now we've just got to convince NZTA. BCR of 3 should be pretty good conversation. Right, speed management plan.
So in February, the draft speed management plan was approved for consultation. That's relevant to marae, schools and the city centre, and a couple of peri-urban routes like Domain Road and Tara. We had over 1,000 responses. Nothing like speed, parking, bus stops to get us some feedback, but that's a phenomenal response actually. So we're really pleased about that and want to extend the thanks to the communities who provided their input to it. And we believe that the recommendations that we have put up are aligned very much with that feedback. And this was an initiative initiated under the previous GPS, which asked for 40% of schools to come down to 30 kilometres per hour by June. So that was sort of the premise for the instigation of the speed management plan and the consultation. The new GPS is a little different in regards to speed management, and we think we have options in here to accommodate that. And I've got Sean here to talk to it and answer any questions. Thank you.
I think Nick has covered that off fairly well, so more than happy to answer any questions.
I've got a few. Okay. Look, I think everyone agrees we want to keep our children safe. And so I'm not surprised when you ask people if you want the speeds reduced outside schools to keep kids safe, they're going to say yes. But actually what is missing from here, from this report, is any, I want to say, evidence of what's happening outside these schools. How many near misses, how many accidents. So there's no record to give us the other side of the picture, because, you know, I've got your graph here that shows the stopping distances and the death and injury risk percentages from different speeds. But see, I'd ask you why we haven't got 20, because I think we all know the slower you go, the faster you can stop and the less damage you do. So that really isn't a logical solution then to say, well, we'll pick 30 because it's better than 40, because why don't you pick 20, which would do even less damage, and you could stop in an even shorter period of time, or even 10 would be the ultimate. So that's what's missing for me, and I've made that clear. I think if we've got schools that are currently at 40, that we should start by getting the rest of our schools to 40k outside, and we should be really putting pressure on our road policing to be apparent and to enforce it, because that's their job, and they're not doing it particularly well anywhere here in Tauranga. People speed and there's no consequences. So that's the first thing. The second question I have really is, what is the justification for the CBD going all the way to 3rd Ave? 2nd Ave is a big wide street with parking on either side, but it's huge, big space. 1st Ave is pretty wide too. And then in one fell swoop, we say that we're just not going to do it in north of Harrington Street until we've sorted out the culture and historical precinct. So I don't understand what the logic is in the CBD. I can understand where where it's been in place temporarily since 2018. I could go with that, because we would just be making that permanent. That's largely encompasses the construction zone. It largely encompasses our one-way system to cope with the construction zone. But beyond that, and I found nothing in the report that gave any reasons for extending it at one end, but leaving it at the other. And yeah, so that's me. I can't support the recommendations as they are here. I would accept B2, that the zones are restricted to 40k with provision for case-by-case reduction. But it's not just speed contributing to safety concerns. I think we should have evidence that there are continual issues with speeding, as you've provided with Tauranga Intermediate. Is it the one in?
That's the Fraser Ave.
That's the Fraser Ave, which is outside a shopping centre, where there's really good evidence with large number of near misses. But it's not just where speed's causing a problem. It should be based on where there are near misses and incidents happening because of speed, that we should then be considering on that case-by-case basis. The maps that you've attached have a large number of compulsory 30k on them in the yellow.
Yep. So I can cover that one. We've included that in locations where the road environment doesn't allow for 50 currently, and that reduces the cost around those variable speed limit signs and such. So if we were to use the Matua area as an example, being that it's on map 1, you've got Clive Dean Street, which is a very narrow street. There's actually some raised raised speed traffic calming devices on the road already, that reduces the speed to that. So rather than spending that additional money on the expense of variable infrastructure, the idea was that that would be instead cheaper, permanent.
Look, I think you need to do a lot more work on this. I'm really reluctant. I mean, that's a considerable area of Mātua that we're going to reduce down to 30K permanently. Is that what you consulted on? Do all of those residents have been consulted on reducing all of that area to 30K? Is that what you're telling me?
So these maps were the maps that were included in the consultation.
Yeah, but that's a bit different from actually, letterbox by letterbox, talking to the people that are going to have their streets reduced permanently to 30K all day, all night. You're just relying on the fact that we've advertised this and there's put out some maps and they're going to pick that up. When we know there's 160,000 people living in the city and you've had only 1,000 responses. That's a great number of responses. But there's another 159,000 people that don't know that we're planning to put their streets down to 30K.
So I was just going into the dashboard, Mātua, as an example, based on the survey and taking your point that it is, while 1,000 is a very high uptake in survey, taking your point that that's still only smaller proportion of the wider population. Mātua had an accepted, because we went down into that level, had a 63% agree to that specific area.
But did you letter drop those streets where you're planning to drop it to 30K is my question.
We did not undertake letter drops on all the streets.
So we could have a lot of people in those streets that had no idea that that's what was happening. They may well have known that you're looking at variable speed along Levers Road. They might have thought that was a good idea.
So we did really push quite a heavy advertising campaign. Except to that, we did not undertake letters to all of letter drops to the entire area.
My worry is, in the latest wave of the citizens survey, right, the survey that we do, 76% of people in the third wave said they didn't know that there was a commission. So, the average person doesn't take any notice of what happens, even though we widely advertise. I'm really worried if we put all these streets down to 30K, that we're going to have a whole lot of people suddenly find this is happening in their streets. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with your concerns, and the reality is most people won't realise this is happening until it's happened, and then we'll have an uproar. Just like we do when parking's taken out. So I share that concern. And the other, I guess there's a couple of things missing for me in this process is, where's the road user view expressed? Have the road user groups been spoken to, and what's their support or otherwise for the proposed changes? And, Road Transport Forum, Automobile Association, those kind of representative groups might be able to provide a view that might kind of provide some counter or balance in the discussion. They may well be supportive, in which case we've got a stronger case to make the decisions. But I just don't know that from reading the report. And the other bit that's kind of really important, I think, in terms of using evidence. So I would have liked to have seen some maps that showed me where the crashes and accidents are occurring to warrant the change in speed. We've got quite a, sort of a theoretical kind of approach, and we all understand that if we reduce speed, then the damage will be lower. but there are other consequences. And so what we really need to understand when we're making these speed decisions is what is real life telling us. And there may well be areas on these maps that I would be very supportive of a speed reduction if the evidence supported that, but I'm not seeing that. So I agree with the chair. I think more work is needed to understand the implications of this from a user perspective and from a real life crash accident statistics perspective. Surely we will have reported data. Not all crashes will be reported, but there should be enough to demonstrate that there's a concern at a particular location. I note the community support, but I think that has to be countered with the evidence and the reaction of the road user side of the groups, which we're not seeing.
I really think this should lie on the table. As reluctant as I am to have major decisions come back on the 10th of June, but I just don't think this report is in a state that we could make a decision on. I think we need to see some data, as Stephen suggested. I also think we need to have some understanding of why you are. It's not just. It's not clear that. I mean, and I just think of. I travel past Matua School every day. We've got a raised crossing there now, and the kids come out from school on this side. So why are we then doing 30k round other schools? Is that where they different places that the kids come out onto the roads?
It's where they often get picked up and the like.
Yes, well, I mean, it's a long walk from the school to Tilby Drive, and yet you're going to make that. So there's no reasoning behind your decisions or your suggestions for the 30k, and some of them, it's. I don't think it can be just where children are picked up. I mean, we've just spent a lot of money on Cameron Road, and traffic is actually flowing really nicely down Cameron Road. Now, in two places, you're proposing that we're going to slow that to 30k. So the consequences, I think there's a lot more work needs to go in. Nick.
Yeah, so we did put in an option there of the 40k. What we are trying to achieve here, just in terms of the environment, and to answer your first challenge with regards to whether we go to 20 or 10, is that you then need to do quite a lot of infrastructure intervention as well, because you can't just expect people to look at a sign and go at 20 when the environment speaks to something quite different. Even 30 would be a stretch, and as you suggest, there would be a demand for an increased police presence. And on that, I would actually like to point out that central government is pushing police onto the streets, and we see much more. Well, much maybe overstating it, but we are seeing more road policing at the moment. But the willing compliance is a really, really important part of this, or you just you get all sorts of speeds, which is an issue in itself. And we think for many of these, where we don't have the issues that we have on Fraser Street, for instance, that 40 may be a good compromise, and would like to promote that. And with regards to the evidence, so we have we have crash data for all of the sites, but I think we shouldn't just lean on the crash data, because I'd hate to be in coroner's court for us then to have evidence to lower the speed. I think, where we see that there may be issues, I think we need to be brave enough to make those decisions with the predictive modelling that we have, rather than just looking at the crash evidence. So it's a very difficult decision to make, but I think it's really important to chuck all of that in the melting pot and consider still the safety of all the road users, and particularly the children around schools. So that's why we put the 40 in here, where we haven't got the evidence that we have necessarily for Fraser Street, and that could be a compromised solution, which would maintain a better level of throughput and traffic movement while making the environment for children and people around Marae, etc., a lot safer.
Yeah, look, I accept that. I started off by saying we all want to keep children safe, and in fairness, the Commission has upheld that. Links Ave is the classic example where we had a clear issue around the safety of children, and when we were bold, but the effect that it had on a large number of other people in the city is what is worrying me, because this is being proactive rather than reactive. Links Ave was reactive. Now we're proposing to be proactive, and I'm just not convinced that we've done enough work so that we're everybody who's going to be affected outside their house, at least, that's not taking into account the other people who are using the roads, understands what's happening in their street. And the maps that are attached don't have 40k, they have 30k, permanent speed 30k. So I suggest that we leave this lie on the table, and that you bring back the report to us on the 10th of June with a lot more information in here. For me, I need to understand why so many streets will be affected in this plan, because it's not just outside of school, and certainly what it is that we're trying to achieve in the city centre. Because for me, just what we've got now at 30k, making that permanent seems a good first step. And if we're not going to do anything north of Maclean, because we're still sorting out the cultural and heritage area, I don't understand that, right? And there's nothing in the report that tells me that. So I suggest we just let it lie on the table and bring it back on the 10th of June.
Thank you. Yep, we'll do that and add the required information. So.
You happy with that? I need to move it. Okay. I will move that the report is brought back to the 10th of June meeting with the evidence that we've talked about here. Stephen seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Right. Gosh, seems like a long morning already. Okay. Ferry proposal. Who's going to talk to this? Simon. There he is. Talk about last gasp.
Yeah, Morena. So I'll take it as read, but we have a proposal in front of us from an established, experienced operator. They operate out of Tauranga Gulf and have a number of vessels operating there, including water taxi services. The proposal covers downtown Mount to Tauranga City only. And as part of the trial, they're going to be putting in some pretty serious capital. They're proposing to construct 2 new ferries for the service, which will include seating for 30 people plus 15 bikes. And for us, this is really supporting an alternative transport mechanism for that trip into the city centre and to the Mount town centre as well, when we know there's going to be pretty significant disruption. So here we're trying to do all we can to support an alternative method of getting into the CBD. There is no need to upgrade our infrastructure as part of this. So the contribution is 700,000 per annum, and it's conditional on the regional council agreeing to do the same. Sure if you wanted to add anything, Nick?
I was going to say hope springs eternal, which is a bit unfair. I mean, we have been talking for 3 years about getting ferries back into our harbour. Used to be a ferry service. Lots of people have talked about them. but it all seemed too hard and too expensive and lots of too much. So the joint public transport committee between the Regional Council and TCC have talked to this proposal. It is reliant on the Regional Council coming to the party with some funding for it, and we're ever hopeful. But I understand they're going through their long-term plan. It's not a huge amount of money, and a 2-year trial is probably sufficient to see whether it's going to work or not. And I think we should literally get on with it. It would be a pretty popular decision for us to make. Stephen.
Moving, I'm happy to second.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm happy to move.
Look, I agree. This is a great opportunity to test the market in a public-private partnership. The council is protected in terms of its limits and the amount that it would pay under the recommendation. So we're not taking demand risk on this. I just hope that our amount is enough to cover the demand risk, because that'll be an issue for the private investor to decide whether or not it's possible for him to do this, and his bankers. But I think it's a great opportunity to test the market without too much cost. And I hope that it's a success and we can expand it into the future.
Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Support the proposition. My question was more around, do we also need to do anything in respect of parking arrangements, etc., particularly on the Mount side?
At this stage, there's no proposal, I don't think, to add parking on that side. So it's more of a kiss and ride arrangement, if you've heard of that before. It gets dropped off and off they go.
I'll just add that with regards to the Mount, we are initiating the parking management plan. So as part of that, if this is approved, we would add the ferry service to the inputs to those considerations as well, of course. So the timing of it is relatively good, I think, in that we're starting that before too long, and we're hoping to have a proposal for that parking management plan by about March, April, I think, next year. And this would be for the summer 25-26. So we're in a position to have considerations on parking on the Mount side.
And one of the reasons for raising it, Chair, is that previously we had talked about the potential, and I can't recall the name of the street, that's at the southern end of Coronation Park, and the opportunities there for people to park and then catch a ferry. So as long as all that's been thought about at some point.
Yeah, so there are things we haven't thought about in this that we will, of course, try to preempt the issues. But I think, and even the Bay of Plenty Regional Council report, it states that it's got doubts about the services viability, and Simon mentioned the upcoming disruption that we will have, and that's why we think we need to find certainty around this, because just to leave it in a doubt is not good enough at the moment. With the disruption we've got coming up, with the challenges that we've got coming up, in 2 years' time, we may well be challenged as to, have you thought about this, that, or the next thing? Well, at least we know for certain the answer to whether the answer to viability of this or not. So I think we have it feels like an obligation here to leave no stone unturned, and I think this proposal does that really well in terms of looking at options while there will be this disruption on the network.
Well, it's a good question, and we had discussed an area, and if you, as you say, the timing is right. The other alternative is the piece of land that we own alongside the old police station that could be used for a bike park, a secure bike park. So you know, as this unfolds, there there may well be good opportunities for us that we should look to make the most of. Because if it succeeds, and I think we all hope that it does succeed, what a fantastic way to go to work. And Auckland, of course, it's just so many people now. I remember all the discussion around the Devonport ferries and should they stay and should they go, and now they're absolutely packed every morning. And it's a disaster when something happens and they can't run. So we talked long and hard about it. I think we could find all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't do this, and I think we should just make the decision and get on with it. As you say, it's making sure we've not left any stone unturned as to how we can. The minute we start on those roundabouts under where the railway line crosses, my godfather, the city's going to come to a halt. So yeah, so every alternative should be explored. All right, moved and seconded. Anything else? No. All those in favour? Oh, so the recommendations are: we're receiving the report. We're agreeing to underwrite up to 50% of the funding required to trial the ferry operations, and that's to a maximum of 1.4 million payable over the first 2 years of the trial. That's 70K each. That's conditional on the regional council coming to the party with the other 50%, the other 700K. And the staff will seek to identify savings through the 25 financial year to fund it. And for the second year of the trial in 2026-27, the underwrite will be included in the 26 annual plan or the rate setting process. And then the proposal can be transferred into the open. Currently, it's the contractual business proposition from the Hauraki Ferries people, and once the trial's over, then that can be released. Okay, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Exciting. Okay, that brings us to temporary road closure for events. Road closures for events. Looks like it's going to be a busy summer.
Yes, this has been publicly notified, and public notification concludes on the 31st of May. So the approval of this is pending any feedback from today until the 31st of May. There is one new event for the schedule for next year. I think that's right, Jenna. Jenna's here to talk to the detail and answer any questions. But there's a triathlon, a new triathlon planned for April at the Mount next year. That's the only addition, I understand.
Just what I will add to that is there's actually, while there's one more, there's 3 less days than the summer just been of closures.
So do we have to add something in? It's in there. It's in
Nick
there.
was just highlighting that there is one new one.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's in there.
That's in there. Thanks, Bill.
There is sometimes some feedback, but there's maybe 9 or 10 complaints over the whole summer. That would also include some that are from waste or something like that. So not a significant amount, surprisingly.
Stephen?
Thank you, though. I do recall a representation that was made to the Commission from one of the businesses affected on Cameron Road, that provide a Saturday service, and when the concerts are on, their business is effectively compromised. So I just wonder if those needs have been adequately accommodated.
As much as possible. It is challenging when you're moving tens of thousands of people into a venue and egressing them, but we do work as close as possible with that business that you've raised around advance warning, getting their access for their customers through the road closures. They get their own pass and things like that. So we work with them on a one-on-one basis.
Take it those issues have been resolved from their point of view?
I don't think that we will be able to completely resolve their concerns, but we've done as much as we can if we want to enable concerts at that space.
Thank you. Shared.
Just looking at a number of events, do they fluctuate over time? Like, do we have some drop off and then others come in?
Yes, it is fairly consistent though. I guess last summer was probably the first summer we saw where everything was back post-COVID, and then we did have a couple of national type events which added to a couple of additional closures on Marine Parade. But the summer's looking similar, if not a little bit less on Marine Parade. But overall, in terms of the numbers we have in all our public spaces across the city, they do increase a little bit each year is what we're seeing.
And I can't recall off the top of my head, but as part of, I assume we've got a action and investment plan around events, and so this kind of feeds into, well, drops out of all of that.
Correct.
All right, anything else? Moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks. Asset realisation reserve, classification of properties. Simon.
Asset realisation reserve. So, as you know, we established this in July last year, and we've set about an initial program of potential sales over the next 12 to 24 months. A key requirement of that proposal is that we first classify the properties under the under the property acquisitions and disposals policy. You'll see from the report that we're suggesting that all but one of the properties is classified as surplus, which will mean that they need to go through an RFR process with mana whenua. And what we're proposing here is that we engage with mana whenua straight away and actually work through a process without formally exercising the 30-day notice, so that I've got plenty of time to consider these properties, and before we actually pull the trigger and do look to divest those properties. There's only one property which we've identified as potentially strategic, and that's the orchard that's residual from the Waiari Water Scheme, which is currently leased to Plant and Food Research, who own the plants on there. And what we're suggesting in the report, because we just simply haven't had time to go through a proper engagement process with mana whenua, that we do so. If there are really material issues that come out of the proposal with respect to the orchard, then we'll have to bring that back to council for a decision. But in relation to surplus properties, because we're viewing that as really advantageous to mana whenua to get it to them early, to give them plenty of time to consider these properties, that we do move forward with a classification of those properties. And really for me, this is just a step to work towards that support for Te Manawataki Te Papa that these properties are really critical for.
Okay. Bill.
Thanks, Simon. I agree pretty much with everything you've got listed. However, the proposition to sell the car park at 134 Greerton Road, I'd just like some teasing out of that. It's a pretty popular car park, and I'm not sure why, as council, we would be intending to sell that. I had looked through the report to see if there was any requirement like there is in the Sulphur Point properties that a use endures, and there may well be opportunity for, as we've talked about in other sites, for a development to go above a car park or whatever, but I'm just raising that as a concern.
Yeah, noted, thanks. And we do have a process to work through on that first. The classification process, as I say, is just a step towards that. There'll be further requirements to get through before we actually even look to pull the trigger on it. Yes, it was a popular car park that council provides for free to people visiting Greerton Village. It's commercially zoned and has no other impediments.
Understand all of that. There might be the opportunity to charge, but furthermore, it is a car park supporting that commercial area. So at this point in time, Chair, I'm not convinced in terms of pulling the trigger on that particular property, unless there are some other restrictions or arrangements in place, or there is something in the resolution that if we were selling that, what's the alternative provision?
You could pull it out of the general surplus and identify it as a strategic property to have the options investigated.
Yep, more than happy to pull that out and bring it back for another decision.
I think it should be Kairua Road, not Kailua.
Correct.
Getting a bit close to the drink.
Just checking that you'd read it.
Thanks, Simon. Just on that particular property, I think the Commission have also had a couple of conversations. I think it was raised by Ngā Pōtahi as well. I understand this property was purchased for potentially a reservoir at one point. Is that property?
That's right. So part of the property is going to be carved off for, there's some ponding down the bottom. And so we've spoken with the waters team who are happy for that area to be carved off and then the balance of the property to be moved on. And yes, it is culturally sensitive as well. There's quite a lot to work through there.
I think, we've had that conversation with Ngā Pōtahi and they're interested in that. So it'd be good to see how that works its way through.
Yeah, well, that's the point of the discussion.
And again, this process is giving us a lot more time than we might otherwise if we just classified divest 30 days. We're looking to give 90, 120 days before we even have to formally move forward.
So, Bill, are you then prepared to move the recommendations with B10 taken down and put into, we've got a D? You'd want to include it, probably a G as a strategic property. At this stage, 134 to 136 Greerton. Thank you. Happy to second. Do we need a reason for it to be strategic?
You're saying it still has a strategic business purpose for council, which is different from a strategic disposal. So I think what you're just asking is to reassess that strategic business purpose and then to come back to either confirm that or to decide that actually it is available for disposal. So
or it could be available for disposal.
Or it could be disposal with conditions.
Yeah.
Which might be things that you want to deal with. Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is that 134 to 136 Greerton Road be considered for strategic business and or divestment. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So Bill, you're happy to move and Shad second with that amendment? Still a long list to go through. Okay. All right. I'll put that then. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks. And that brings us to Te Manautaki o Te Papa financial strategy.
So this paper is bringing a number of things together around the Te Manautaki o Te Papa strategy from the finance side. It includes an update in terms of the external funding stack, subject to the previous paper, in terms of the asset realisation reserve. Just to note that we, whilst the decision was made for the LTP to retain the parking, building and fund debt through that, it's still sitting in the numbers for the asset realisation reserve as the quantum's consistent with that. It shows effectively 121 million available and 103 million required at this under the current fairly conservative assessment of what that funding stack looks like. The other purpose of the paper is to finalise the IFF transaction to come into effect from 1 July 25 that's been previously consulted on. So the IFF is within the consulted range. There's when the levy proposal was concluded, there's a requirement to include an amount of buffer based on the current interest rates, which took the commercial rates slightly higher, 6% higher than the consulted range. So that's what's included within the report. So provided the financing comes back through that competitive process that's currently underway, that will continue. I would say that the current, or on the 7th of May, we did the last test of where markets sat, and it was that commercial was now well within the range, actually towards the bottom of the range. So where numbers are including buffer. So if these resolutions are passed, the transaction will move forward. There's some fairly large documents that go with the transaction, which we're still in public excluded because they're still going through negotiations with lenders as part of the process before they will come out into open. They reflect effectively that where that transaction is landing and allows for council in the event, the only reason that council would not go forward with the transaction is if it goes outside of that range when that market testing takes place. And everything else is in place for a delegation for the chief executive and myself in terms of executing those documents, except for documents under deed, which will need to be commissioners effectively signing those. That's being worked on to finalise those documents as we speak.
So Paul, there was no surprises in here, except that I had no idea. Well, I didn't realise. I thought we had made specific decisions around the funds from the Marine Precinct and Smith's Farm. I didn't realise that those funds were going into the asset realisation reserve. I thought we'd had a specific resolution that those funds were to be used for Te Manautaki o Te Papa.
So the resolution that was passed is that they go into the asset realisation, and then the first order of use of those funds from asset realisation is Te Manautaki.
Because the worry is when you look at the funding sources, it doesn't show, and yet we've committed. So shouldn't there be another line that shows committed ARRR?
Just thinking we could add a resolution that says that, notes that the amount required from the asset realisation has been committed from the asset, towards Te Manautaki. Yeah, we could add that resolution. That's, I'll just, well, there isn't it, yes, but that's the first.
The first.
While they're working out that, do you want to ask another one?
Yes. Thanks, Chair. It was just around the growth funding component, and that had started off at 10.9, then it went to 11.4, and it's now down to 0.7. And I just wanted some clarity around I think I know, but the reasoning for the reassessment down to 0.7, because that's quite a reduction of reduced income from that particular source.
Yes, so there's two elements for the reduction. One is under the IFF legislation, for reasons unbeknown to me, it's treated as a grant when the money comes back in to council. That effectively means that that's taken off the amount of that can be funded from development contributions. So in effect, because 50% is coming through that IFF levy, 50% of the development contribution is reduced. We have flagged this as a potential correction to the legislation in the future. But the other element that's happened is a reassessment of the growth component related to the central library, which has reduced that amount right down. So there's two elements to it. One was but the bigger component now was actually the reassessment of growth to that project.
Is there some doubt that the government is going to is not going to honour the Better Off funding?
No, well, there was a request effectively for a confirmation effectively of the use of those funds. So which is what we've written back from, but there's been nothing to indicate that it would be removed. Just looking at Gareth if he has any other, but
I think the letter inquired whether we would voluntarily return the money if we had no plan to use it.
Right.
And we replied and said, we've absolutely got a plan to use it. We've already started spending at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So have we got an extra recommendation? Oh, okay. All right. The other question for Christine then is, there's an increase in the proceeds from Smith's Farm from 11 million to 24 million. How does that happen?
I think you'll find that's a reflection of the sale price.
Oh, okay.
It is, and
But you whittled all the money away with all the costs.
we have, and there's still further work, so it's not finalised yet. So it's probably, I haven't seen that number in there. So the infrastructure costs have to come out.
I think you'll find that that's our bottom line after expenses have been removed.
Right, okay. So we've got a resolution around Marine Precinct and Smith's Farm. Do we have a resolution around Poterefi?
We haven't.
I didn't think we had.
No, I think that was in the last meeting. Because of the infrastructure costs associated with getting the active reserve in there, the resolution that you passed was that some of the proceeds from the residential development could be used for the infrastructure required and the development of the active reserve rather than adding another active reserve budget. So I think once we're a little bit further down the track and we understand what the realisable value of the residential is, then we'd probably look at it. But you've set that direction and what you've done and kept the door a bit open. Yeah.
I think if we just have Smith's Farm and Smith's and Marine Precinct, we've definitely made resolutions.
Yeah, so you might be just note that the asset realisation be applied with specific resolutions already passed in respect of Smith's and Marine Precinct to be directly applied.
Janie's got that. Proceeds from asset divestment. I think we need to name Smith's Farm and Marine Precinct. Confirms that proceeds from asset divestment from Smith's Farm and the Marine Precinct will be allocated to the asset realisation reserve. Will be allocated from the asset realisation reserve in the first instance to fund Te Manawataki or Te Papa. Isn't that what we're saying? Yeah. Will be allocated from the asset realisation reserve in the first instance to fund Te Manawataki or Te Papa.
Yeah, I think the paper where we established the asset realisation fund details all of this as well. And so this is really just a reinforcement of what would already have been resolved.
It's just that if you're a ratepayer or an outside funder, looking at that, we're a long way off the 154. Whereas in actual fact, there's more that's been committed that isn't showing. That's my concern. Looks like we're still 100 million short.
Yeah, of course, then we've got the inner city car parks and the way that we were proposing to loan against, yes, so.
It almost needs another box, doesn't it, to show?
I think the table on page 153 clarifies it though.
Yes, but you've got to go there. The trouble is you've got this one over here. You've got two tables, which one's right? This one doesn't look too good.
No, but if you then look at table 3, you can see that the asset realisation reserve bridges that funding with some money to spare.
There's resolution C.
Yeah, but that's including a whole lot of stuff that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
That's the problem. We haven't separated out what we've actually realised or have contracts to realise as against what we've just done, which is a whole lot of properties that can be sold to realise that.
I think for clarity it's helpful, but yeah.
All right, so I'm happy to move that with that addition. That helps. In a second. So let's just be clear, we're receiving the report and noting the latest updated funding tables in paragraphs 17 and 35 with those points noted. Confirms that loans will be available from the airport and parking activities to reflect the amounts noted in table 3 on paragraph 35, as you've pointed out, Stephen. Confirms the infrastructure funding and financing levy with a levy amount of up to $128, including GST for financial year 2026 for a median residential levy payer and up to $464, including GST for a median commercial levy payer, which is along the lines that we consulted on.
For clarity, the commercial was 440 and what we consulted on, so that was slightly higher, which based on having a buffer in there. We would hope the number would come in less.
So the critical part is that it's up to that.
Yeah, as on the 7th of May it was $406, so it's within at the moment.
Okay. Confirms that the levy will commence on the 1st of July 2025. Notes that the amount of the maximum are within the consulted range for the residential ratepayer, but slightly higher for the commercial ratepayer, and that it contains a buffer amount to allow for those movements in interest rates, which all look to be downwards at the moment, fingers crossed. Confirms the delegation to 2 commissioners to sign the monitoring deed once it's in its final form and any ancillary documents that are deeds. Agrees to the changes to the infrastructure funding and financing funding and administration agreement outlined in the confidential report, attachment to this report, and delegates to the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer to finalise those arrangements. Agrees delegation to CE and CFO to sign any amendments necessary to the existing Transport System Plan IFF contractual documents. to make sure that the TSP IFF is consistent with the Te Manawataki o Te Papa IFF.
That's right, for clarity, because TSP comes in on 1 July 24. There are some elements that have changed that'll come into effect on 1 July 25. So yeah, that's effectively just allowing it. It's largely around the ranking of rating and ranking of amounts. So.
Right. Approves the draft levy remission and postponement policies included in that in a confidential attachment, and delegates authority to the CE or CFO to agree minor or technical changes. And those attachments, numbered 1 to 5, can be transferred into open upon the IFF transaction being concluded, subject to the Crown being able to take out any of the confidential commercial terms. Right, so it's been moved and seconded. I'm sorry, I didn't. I moved it and Stephen seconded it. That is a significant step for the city and also for Te Manawataki o Te Papa, to confirm that. I'm going to put that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. It is now 10:30, so we will have it's going to be a long day. So we will now have a 15-minute break. Meeting's adjourned until 10:45. Okay, so the meeting is resumed. The item number 11.9, the decisions on the independent hearings panel recommendations on plan change 33, the Commission still preparing their decisions, so that we're deferring that until after lunch. Anyone who is here to listen to that. So we will go to item 11.10, Cameron Road Indoor Court Project.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. So 483 Cameron Road. So what the report does is briefly outline the use of the building for indoor courts. I've been corrected. It's not only for basketball. It will be for many other indoor activities. This is the purpose. This is the reason you bought the building, and that project continues. So the team are upgrading the seismic grading, structural stuff for the building, and that project continues. But the purchase of that building has presented an opportunity for us. Now, the paper seeks resolution to utilise the 600 square metre mezzanine floor for the purposes of an emergency operating centre, or commonly known as an EOC, and also to utilise that space as an open area for bay venues to use. The reason why we don't have an EOC in 90 Devonport is outlined in the report. When you want to use a brand new building for an EOC, it needs to be IL4. We haven't built Devonport Road at an IL4, but because this 483 Cameron Road is a upgrade of a building, we can utilise that, and that's been confirmed by engineers who work closely in this arena. The paper also recommends that, given the mixed activity that we've got in one building, namely indoor court provision, hopefully an emergency operating centre if you're agreeable to that, and car park, the council retains the ownership of that building, and that we enter into a lease or a heads of agreement with bay venues that will allow them the opportunity to utilise uninhibited the floor for indoor sports. This report's come as we've been working on this report quite recently, so we haven't gone into the details of what a lease would include, but a fairly standard lease that allows them to operate as per they would normally expect. Also, there's a mention of the fact that the car park that we have underneath this building and the public area, the uncovered area, we need to come back with some planning instruments, namely a change to the bylaw to give effect to being able to charge for parking under the building. The plans on the agenda aren't very good, so we have issued a bigger copy, but what that shows, as we've referred to in the report, that on the ground floor there is room for some staff of bay venues to operate the court facilities and a tournament room. Bay venues have identified that they need 10 staff in the building. That plan shows you that there's an area set up for 3. What we're suggesting in the mezzanine floor, it would be an open area that they could utilise for more staff, and having a bigger area for tournaments, for large tournaments. And the other, if you turn it over like Bill has, the other side just shows you the size of the mezzanine floor. When we bought 483 Cameron Road, it was always for indoor sports, and the mezzanine floor, or anything to do with the mezzanine floor, wasn't included in the project cost. What we're saying here is that an EOC is fairly inexpensive. Staff have a budget to buy the equipment that they need to populate an EOC, and other than that, we could just move in as it is. Over time, it'd be nice to have it painted or titivated up a little bit, but right now we could just move in without any extra budget other than what's already accommodated in OPEX for the civil defence emergency management activity. We are very clear that the two operations could operate separately, particularly, the indoor courts and the EOC. The only time it would be affected if we had, a major event like we did maybe in 2004, 2005 here in Tauranga, where we were looking at a significant event. But most events could allow the indoor courts to continue and us operating at EOC out of that mezzanine floor. So happy to answer any questions.
Barbara, any questions? Oh.
I think you've covered it off, Barbara, but it was just that clarity that all of the expenditure required for the EOC is coming from a different source other than the court facility budget, because I think budgets are challenging, and I just was concerned if anything was getting siphoned off for the EOC.
Absolutely, and the project managers are very clear about that. And as I said, it was never designed that anything was going to be spent on the mezzanine floor when we set out on this project. And what it's done is presented an opportunity for us to have an EOC, which we're required to have.
Move, Chair, but I take it in terms of Resolution B, if we took out basketball and put in community indoor court facility, is
that would be appreciated by some of the users.
Yep. Jed.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm happy to second, and I do have a question. In terms of the parking, the covered parking, I assume we'll kind of follow similar timeframes to city parking. I can't remember whether it's 9 start and 5 finish, and then outside of that would be available for the facility.
Yeah, that's correct.
Anything else? So I would be assuming that. So we own the building, so we'd be responsible then for maintenance outside of the building.
Mm.
I'm assuming that we wouldn't be charging anything BVL, anything in the lease. It would be if it has to be a peppercorn rental or a memorandum of understanding that they operate it, and the costs of maintaining that inside would then fall on them. Is that?
So it'd be, well, we'd originally said a lease. Bay Venue, I think, have a preference for a heads of an agreement, but whatever we use, it would be exactly that. We would add the building as a structure onto our renewal program, like we do with many other buildings, and then we would talk to them about the detail of line marking, the floor, that level of detail, as normally a tenant would be required to.
And they would want to have that.
Yes, absolutely.
Responsibility.
We have spoken to Bay Venues so we can chat so that we can work through those details, I think, quite easily in a lease. It's just that in the timing to get this here, we hadn't had time to do that.
Understood. Okay. That was all I had. It's good to see.
Thank you.
Okay. Nothing further? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. City Centre Public Realm Guidelines.
Maria Tato. Just while Emily's coming up, we'll say a couple of words. As you all know, there is an action in the City Centre Action Investment Plan that speaks to the need to establish a framework for some level of consistency in terms of how we develop our streetscape and urban environment in the city centre. We've done some streets, so there's Durham, Wharf, Elizabeth East and West, for example, and they do look relatively similar, and that's something that we want to continue as we continue to roll out streetscape development right across the city in the next 10 years, including Te Manawataki, the waterfront, and all of the streetscapes that are going to support the private sector development that's happening in the city centre. So Emily and the team have been working over the last year or so to pull together all of the different parts that make up the need to have a set of guidelines to shape how we develop the streetscapes in the city centre, and that's in front of you today. I know you've seen it before, and just happy to answer any questions, but looking forward to having a document that consolidates that cohesive look and consistent look and feel across our city centre as we grow and develop over the next few years. Over to Emily if she wants to add anything.
Thanks, Gareth. I think you've covered most of it. Happy to take questions.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but I have to say we're spending a hang of a lot of money trying to create a city centre that is bright and vibrant and full of activity. And we've got the most boring colour palette of grey, brown and beige. And I understand that that's natural. So then I look to the vegetation to add a bit of brightness and colour that we're seeing around the city at the moment. And all I get is pictures of Pahutakawa, which flower for sort of 2 weeks out of 50, out of 52, and nothing more. So I'm looking for more colour, and I think we get that from exotics. I understand we want to reflect some of the original vegetation that was there, but we also want to reflect the over 100 years of European civilization that's been here. And I think we also want to reflect the 20% of our population who are born outside of New Zealand. I don't see those two latter reflected very much in here. So I would like to see a greater mix of exotics. And I have to say, the green necklace, if it is to be designed as a walking and cycling round of the city, you need shade in the summer. We've said this for 3.5 years, shade in the summer and light in the winter. And 85% native will not give us that. You need more deciduous trees. Otherwise, you're going to create dark, damp, unpleasant spaces, and people will not walk there. And they won't cycle there either because it will be not, they won't feel safe. So I think your mixes of exotic and native are wrong. And when you look at the colour palette of those plants and you just turn the page from the native, which is lovely and green, and that's, you know, that's great. We want to see that. But you turn over the page and you've got vibrancy. And somehow we've got to get that vibrancy into our environment. Especially on a day I drove down from Mātua today, and there's the street trees are vivid red and orange, and it's a dull grey old day out there, and it lifts your spirit. We're just creating more dull grey spaces with some greenery. It's not going to be a vibrant place.
Just in response, I mean, our goal is absolutely to create vibrancy, not just through public realm design, but through the activities that people are encouraged to undertake in those spaces. As you've mentioned, the palette is quite specific and has been taken from our kind of geology and ecological kind of basis. So we've been quite deliberate to move away from some of the other cities who have preferred a kind of a dark bluestone, dark grey public realm design, and we have chosen the sandier tones, the shell fleck through concrete, and I think that can be enhanced more and more. We've taken a character zone approach, and so the central part of the city, which is that really special part of the design around Te Manawataki o Te
Look,
Papa.
I understand all that. Look, I've read all that.
Okay,
I understand all that. But at the heart of it, you've still got the most colourful part of the inner city is going to be the rubbish bins. And that's sad. The rest of it's all going to be very natural and, yep, but where's the vibrancy? And you can do that with some planting.
And so the approach with these guidelines is that it will take us 70% of the way there, but it doesn't avoid the need for projects to take a place-based approach to how that street or public realm should develop. So that is the opportunity to include vibrancy, such as planting, absolutely. That the planting strategies create a guideline, but that each place specifically in terms of its stories that we want to enhance, or the key features, or the particular climate in that part of the city, that can be much more responsive to the type of planting we want to see in that project or in that place. And then the other piece that isn't included in this that would be absolutely applied on top would be the public art strategy, so that we are adopting colour through street art or other public art approaches, signage and wayfinding, So there's kind of other things that will be added to these streetscapes.
And me saying any more, I've told you what I think, you don't accept it. Okay, you design a city where the most colourful bits are your rubbish bins, that's fine.
I don't think that we don't accept it, because I think we all agree that colour and vibrancy is integral to the success of how people feel in our city centre. And I think what Emily was saying is that the guidelines are designed in a way that creates that base platform that allows you to build on that and add as much colour as you'd like. And maybe what we need to do to satisfy your desire in that space is add some very specific words that say, in terms of building on that base, the clear direction is add colour, which adds vibrancy.
I was just looking for these 2 pages. So this is your native tree palette, right? This is your exotic tree palette. This is your native plant palette. This is your exotic plant palette. This is the palette that's largely going to be at our city entrances that our Spaces and Places team are using. We want some of this, but this also reflects where the city is today. So we need a mixture of respecting the past in Mana Whenua and what was there. But we also have to reflect the population we have here today, and that's European. And every month I conduct a citizenship ceremony, 70 to 80 people, they're from 20 odd different countries around the world. I don't see them reflected enough in the centre city.
So should we just change the balance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's as easy as changing a
Would
percentage.
make a big difference.
Yeah. So if that's the feedback, that's an easy thing to change, because I don't think anyone suggests that we want to move away and be exclusively exotic. It's all about balance. And if the balance is 50-50 versus 70-30, then let's do that.
Thank you.
If that's the direction, that's easy to.
Well, what I'm saying is accept your natural paving, accept all of that. But I think on top of that, you need to put some colour and some life and some vibrancy, and you won't get that. There's different, I can't find it quickly, but there's different percentages of exotic versus native. Your green necklace is 85% native and 15% exotic, and I'm saying that's not going to provide enough light in winter. You need some deciduous, and there's not many deciduous native trees. Then in your centre city, in your 3 different zones, I can't find, I know one zone is 50-50, but I think you need to have, in some places, more exotic to get more colour than native. So you need to reverse some of those.
Through the chair, I think some of the words that you've used around multiculturalism, diversity, and expressing that through colour, perhaps we need to include those specific words or similar in the document as well to give flavour and life to that. And then I think those that are picking up the document and working with that to develop the city can understand the basis by which we would want to introduce a much wider range of colour.
And I just look at Emily sitting there, and I put my glasses on. She's got browns. She's got basic colours, but she's brightened it with yellows. I don't mean just a corfi that flowers for a week out of 52.
So Chair, just confirming page 56 has the breakdown of percentages, and confirming that our typical city centre fringe street, Te Manawataki o Te Papa, and central streets are 50-50. Heritage in the domain area is 80% exotic, 20% native, and then it's the green necklace, both the inner streets, Elizabeth Street and Cameron Road, and the green necklace that are at that 85-15 split, and that is the recommendation to change that to 50-50.
I just think it has to, I don't think the percentage on the green necklace is important. What's important is that you get light and shade into that green necklace so that people in the summertime are shaded And in the wintertime, there's enough light coming through those deciduous. But I can't, what page did you say it was on?
56.
Oh, 56 of this. Right, we've got.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, E 8.2.
Well, we can go back and scan the document and try and reflect that where appropriate throughout the document.
Yeah, and maybe we could catch up the chair after the meeting just to double check that we've got, some clear direction. And I like the idea of bringing a couple of those words into the considerations at the front end that speak to light and shade and colour. So there's very clear direction for anyone picking this up in terms of where you're wanting it to go. And I mean, the percentages aren't hard and fast either. They're a guideline. They are city centre design guidelines. So there is flexibility in there as well. But let's bring that back. If we make tweaks, are you comfortable to bring that back on the 10th of June? So that's something we can.
Oh, I think, don't we? Yeah, we can.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
I think we can just make a few tweaks, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can adopt this subject to
Yeah.
the direction that we've been given.
And any other feedback that Bill might have?
Well, I was going to raise some matters about the colour, but I think we've dealt with that. So I'll go on to 2 or 3 other topics. In terms of, and I'm on the attachment where it outlines, and I'm on page 157, talks about the movement strategy and picks up the green necklace. Just keen as we work in the city centre that those east-west connections for both pedestrians and cycling are considered. So it's not just going around the north-south, but it's going across the peninsula. I've got nothing in particular, but it's just the consideration of that as we move forward. Then on the built form strategy, which is outlined on page 159, I was just no issue with what is there, but I think a key connection in terms of what's the planning frameworks and the things like district plans and what you're trying to achieve here, so that there is some alignment. As opposed to saying, yep, the built form approach is great from a design, but in terms of execution, if there are impediments or there are issues with the district plan or other planning documents, that's considered so that we actually have a clear focus on what we're trying to achieve. And then
Bill, did you want me to respond quickly to that?
Yes, yeah.
Yep, only that working with the Plan Change 38 team, just on this exact matter, I understand that there's a whole work stream around urban design for that project, as well as business land framework. So, the intention certainly is that if any urban design guidelines were adopted for built form or for a veranda design, for example, that they would work in tandem with this public realm scheme.
Yeah, no, that's
go into more detail.
Fine. And I'm just reading my notes here. It was what's proposed in terms of getting, once these are approved, anchored throughout the organisation. So when we're doing work or providing policy direction or whatever, these aren't forgotten about and are quite fundamental in terms of looking ahead, both from an organisational point of view, obviously, and what the council does, but also, again, in the private sector.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, but Emily's been very deliberate in terms of bringing all of the different parts of the organisation on the journey to develop the guidelines. So I feel like there's a high level of awareness of them already. And we were keen to get them signed off so that they became something that there was a level of requirement to have to consider when we were developing spaces in our city centre. And planting is a really good example where Marty's been really clear with our organisation that if you are designing something that involves the planting of trees or shrubs or whatever it is, you involve our urban foresters, because they are our experts. And it's the same with a document like this, where it exists for the specific reason of providing those guidelines, and we expect people to follow them. So I wouldn't say we're across the line in terms of, there will still be some challenges in terms of getting parts of the organisation to take them up, but a lot of that work has been done during the development of them.
Final comment, Chair. And Gareth, you mentioned earlier in terms of they are guidelines, no issue with that, but it's ensuring that the guidelines are that, because if there are particular projects, there is that clear need, and we've touched on it earlier in the discussion, for that flexibility. So the guidelines don't just become the mantra and there's slavish adherence to them. There might need to be, depending on the location of a particular initiative, road upgrading, street upgrading, or whatever, that there is that flexibility inherent in that.
100% flexibility in there in that regard. We've already done it with a couple of Te Manawa projects where in an ideal world there would be an enhanced level of paving, for example, but in terms of the budget available, we can't afford it. So we've changed our expectations a little bit to meet what we have available at the moment to spend. So yes, there's that flexibility in there. And we also don't know in 5 to 10 years from now, what will be different, and what we might design today could be different in 5 years. So the guidelines need to be flexible and, available to respond to the changes over the next few years that may come our way.
Yeah, I was happy to move we probably need an addition subject to the amendments agreed at the meeting or something like that in terms of that flexibility.
You're happy to move that? I've still got a few questions. Go on, you go.
Thanks, Emily. Just to kind of follow on the conversation. I mean, I had the same kind of questions, I suppose, that ended about the balance between, but I think we've kind of traversed that. The other area, and just kind of touching on the previous conversation about, we talked about exotics and natives. One of the other areas I think we haven't done so well in, and we've done really well probably in the last 3 to 5 years, is actually how do we recognise mana whenua's contribution in the city, in the CBD, and there's a lot of that that's now reflected. But actually, from a heritage perspective, other heritage, I think there's a bit of an absence there, and we do need to recognise that. So to try and bring that balance. And there are some, like the Harry's Arch and up at the Domain and those kinds of things need to be protected and looked after, because a lot of our built heritage is now gone. So we do need to protect and look after that. And I suppose that's trying to get that balance right as well. Yes, recognising the relationship that mana whenua have to particular areas, and we've done, just out here and all throughout the city. But actually there are some other stories and narratives that need to be told as well. Probably my main question is, in terms of the document itself, and I couldn't see anything reflected in the document or on the paper, is there an intention for this to be kind of a live document, and then at some point in the future would need to be, like how we monitor the way the city develops over time, and then potentially reviewing this in time?
Yes, we have given that some thought. Obviously, a huge amount of work's gone into this document, but we are cognizant that things will change over time. So there's a couple of ways that we're looking at that. One is that this isn't, we got some feedback from the urban design panel that questions around sustainability and climate change adaptation perhaps weren't coming through strongly in the document. Through a sustainability grant, we're looking at a peer review of the document itself and a base case to start to introduce what other choices could be made from a sustainable perspective, and how we can connect this much more into our biodiversity action and investment plan. But otherwise, in the paper, we recommended a periodic update or review of the document kind of every 3 years, dependent on how we're tracking. But really, the guidelines should be flexible enough that they can be adapted as we go, and it would only be if things are starting to take a dramatic change in terms of levels of investment or other that we would do a wholesale change. Heritage, yes, definitely. So a couple of things on that. So I guess that we have tried to stress in the document that this is very much the starting point, but it also guides a project team on how to start the project. So that's probably more evident in an extension to the cultural mapping exercise that was in this City Centre Action Investment Plan that's now been updated in this document. And the thought is that when a project comes up, you geolocate it in the map of the city, you understand the underlying stories or the things that make that place important, and then that should be reflected through the project. And it would be a very much a place-based approach to the various features or the stories that should be enhanced through the public realm design and really thought out. There was a real challenge in trying to assume we could agree on one single motif or story for that covers the city centre as a whole. And I think that public realm design can be much richer if you take a place-based approach by streetscape. Having said that, there may be some streets in the city where we've got, we just are able to roll out a fairly simple streetscape upgrade, whether it's a laneway or something. That would then in turn also inform hopefully a public realm, public art strategy as well, where those stories could be enhanced. The other element to keeping this document updated is part of this document that's underway at the moment is the signage and wayfinding master plan, which is both a pedestrian wayfinding but also the interpretation strategy. So those interpretation boards will, I'd assume, would tell all stories appropriate to that place.
So I've just got a couple of questions on your network of fine grained spaces. I'm not quite sure what that all means, but page 158 of the attachment, that's right, basically the laneways and pedestrian ways. Does this bind council into buying property to create laneways? Does this commit us? I mean, we've identified a whole lot of laneway or potential ways through the city. Some of which are private property.
Yeah, it doesn't commit us to anything, but it just says that if we were to, this is how it would, look and feel.
And we've included from Cliff Road down to Dive Crescent. I'm on page the attachment.
That would have been taken from the City Centre Action Investment Plan, but we've had subsequent conversations, so we can remove that.
I think we should remove it. I mean, it's never going to happen in any of our lifetimes it's just impossible.
We can move it to the Marsh Street Bridge.
I don't think we ever agreed for it to go in the Action Investment Plan either. Raises false hope from people. It is rather explicit, those laneways.
We could change the strongly dashed, the full lines to dashed lines. I think the importance is for council to be able to take opportunities as they arise, either through new developments or opening up of existing access ways that perhaps have been closed up over time.
Yes, that's what's worrying me. Once we commit this to paper, if a property comes on the market, then the organisation could feel that it has the right to purchase those properties.
It does say indicative locations, and any decision to purchase would always have to come back to the chamber. It's just, I guess it's just signalling that we want to create the build point before those east-west connections, and we've, based on how the city's built at the moment, we've identified some indicative locations that could work for that. If and when opportunities came available, we'd bring it back and have a conversation and make a decision at that point in time if it was something we could afford to do.
I also think it's taking the opportunity to work with developers to say, this is what council would like to see in terms of how our city operates. Could this be adopted in your plans?
Yeah, but there's a hang of a lot of them. Through, I mean, we've got Goddard's Lane and Piccadilly already. I presume those two are already shown, but there's a lot more that we're talking about. How do we arrive at all of those? Have we established the need for all of those, I guess is what I'm asking.
I'll check back on this map. I'd understood that this work had happened prior to the City Centre Action Investment Plan, and then the City Centre Action Investment Plan took on an emphasis or an objective to create fine grain spaces in the city. But I'll confirm that.
I'd suggest that these opportunities won't come up very often, and if they do, there probably only a very few of them would able to be capitalised on. So it's probably indicative of what the opportunity is as opposed to what we will achieve.
I don't understand what fine grain spaces means anyway. And I look along First Ave, we've got an on-street fine grain space. What does that mean?
Sounds like coffee.
Exactly. That's kind of it. It's about smaller human scale shop fronts as opposed to large inactive frontages. It's the thought of those in-between spaces. So a laneway that's created, you feel better if those each side is activated or has smaller shops or smaller hospitality venues coming off them, as opposed to them being kind of a channel of blank walls.
Okay. All right, I just think we're creating a huge expectation. We're putting a whole lot of property values up because they think council might want to buy them or buy some space off them. And I'm not sure that First Ave and Second Ave, where we know the ground's the best in the city, and probably where our commercial redevelopment's going to happen over the next 10 years, is do we really want that to be coffee bars and hospitality when we're centering it downtown? We've got to have somewhere in the city for business to do business. Anyway.
A good example is the Vantage Apartments on Cameron Road and the new units that have been created at that ground floor with the various businesses. I think that's a good example of taking a block, but taking smaller grain spaces, finer grain, human scale at that ground level.
Yes, but you can only have so many coffee bars in town. That's the difficulty. You have to sell a hell of a lot of cups of coffee to make a profit. Okay, all right, so you're going to make some adjustments and bring it back to us on the 10th of June. So the motion, we haven't got a seconder for it yet. Bill's moved it, Shad seconded. So we're receiving the report, endorsing the proposed guidelines with some amendments to be made, and bringing it back on the 10th for final sign-off. Is that right? You happy with that? Okay. And anything else that you want to take up with Emily and the staff in the meantime before that? Okay. I'll put that, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Emily. Right, so we now have two papers on Cameron Road. The urban transformation. Yep. Yep. No, tour and open and one's in public excluded. So Cameron Road Stage 2 Urban Transformation Project is the first paper. Yep.
Sorry?
Christine's going to speak to the first paper.
Right. Just disappeared on me. So the purpose of this paper is to provide an overall picture of what's happening in terms of delivering on the urban growth agenda that council has. And it really is just trying to describe as simple as possible the overall complexity of the whole puzzle of growth and growth, infrastructure, transport, funding and delivery. And it's described in here as all of the components, and it shows it in the attachments as a jigsaw. It is a 3D jigsaw. And if you think about the game Jenga, where you put all the bits in the stack, we've been working diligently, as have you, over the last 3 to 5 years, actually putting all of those bits, getting all of those pieces of the puzzle so they can all be injected to make the stack come together. But unfortunately, what happens as soon as you get one piece of the jigsaw or the Jenga stack, another one gets pulled out. And then without the whole lot, it actually collapses. And that's sort of the challenge that we've had on an ongoing basis. So what this paper does is tries to bring together and just articulate what all of those components are, how council has stepped through probably over the last 5 years, building up all of those components, working with our partners, smart growth partners, but also with the Crown and in particular NZTA, including formal NZTA approval processes to put everything in place. And on the back of all of that work, this council has made a series of very significant decisions on behalf of its community with the purpose of actually getting delivery on the ground. So we have struggled with having perfect plans, but actually struggling to actually have that translated into delivery on the ground. And so a lot of the steps that have been taken have been particularly working on that implementation phase. And through the last long-term plan, through your decision to establish an infrastructure funding and financing levy that generates 175 million over 30 years to fund 13 of the most significant transport projects, which is a compulsory charge to our community that is irreversible. You've made quite substantial changes to our rate structure, including increasing the burden that falls to commercial industrial who have a significant economic benefit from an efficient and well-run transport system, but also housing supply, which means that people who want to work for these companies actually can get a home, and maximising your debt balances. So that's all been well and trained, but there's been quite a few recent events since late last year that are impacting on that. So the paper just goes through and describes those. The new government has put in a government policy statement which has seen a shift to more focus around congestion and moving vehicular traffic, particularly on major roads. The infrastructure financing and funding levy we have been charging, that kicks in from 1 July this year, and if we are unable to spend it because we don't have a full funding stack, there is a financial cost to council. On the back of that, this council, the Chair Tolley wrote to the ministers on the 29th of April, just really outlining that position and saying there'd been a bit of a shift. When the decision was made to proceed with the infrastructure and financing levy, the Commission relied on that letter of best endeavours. It was actually, they delayed the decision until you had that letter where the ministers of finance, transport and housing at the time agreed that they would, if there was a situation where funding was not flowing, that we would work together and find to see if there were solutions and ways forward. And the letter that's been sent recently is really seeking a commitment from this government that they would take a similar position and work together. We have not yet received a response to that letter. So this report is trying to outline these matters and really seeking some direction from the Commission as to whether you wish us to continue on the current pathway of trying to continue to get a response and continuing to raise and advocate these matters at a central government level.
Apologise. It is actually the commitment, the paper that's commitment to and funding of transport investments to enable housing supply is the paper that Christine's talking to. My apologies. So that's the bigger picture that we're trying to deal with. There's quite a lot in this paper, but we felt it was best to set it all out. I think the main thing with the letter of best endeavours as part of that IFF levy is that, and we have raised this with ministers as well as writing to them, was that was developed under the previous GPS, and so the projects that are itemised in that IFF levy were projects agreed to under the previous GPS. And the risk we run now is that, and we've seen it already with Turret Haerini this morning, 15th Ave Turret, I should say, this morning, is that we may have to adjust some of those projects to meet the requirements of the new GPS. So we've raised that with ministers and our local MPs to make sure that we get a bit of flexibility. But the letter of best endeavours came about because NZTA can't commit beyond, legally can't commit its funding beyond its 3-year horizon. This coalition government is talking about extending that to 10 years, but the IFF levy goes beyond that for 30 years. So even a contemplation of an extension from 3 to 10 doesn't completely help us. So the Crown agreed that we would go through the process with these projects through the National Land Transport Program process. And then if they did not get funding through that, then the Crown agreed to sit down and round the table and talk with us about how we could fund those projects and what the process might be. So that's the obligation on the Crown. It was signed by the previous government. We're seeking to have confirmation from the current government that that still stands. It's signed by the Minister of Finance, Minister of Transport and Minister of Housing. So it's imperative that I can't see any reason why the Crown wouldn't honour that, because it doesn't commit them to funding anything. It just commits them to a process of talking about how we fund these projects, which are so critical to the development of the ongoing development of Tauranga. So we're seeking a response from the ministers to that. In the meantime, this sets out the amount of work that has gone on to get this jigsaw puzzle together, and how easily the whole thing can be pulled apart by just one small piece of the funding strand, whether it's a timing, and we're currently experiencing that, where the new National Land Transport Program won't be finalised till September, whereas we're starting to levy in our ratepayers in July, or whether it's actually not getting some of those projects agreed to be funded through the National Land Transport Program. And Stephen's been working at the regional level, and we're confident that we have our major projects at the top of the list with our colleagues, but I think 4 out of the top 6 are Tauranga major projects. 4 out of the top 7, top 5. So, and that just reflects the criticality of those projects. So we're caught betwixt and between, really, and this paper is just setting out the critical need for that nexus between transport and housing that the new GPS recognises, but hasn't yet been set in concrete by the new government, by the incoming government, and there's a time lag with that. We'd almost got the previous government to understand that nexus as well, but it's absolutely critical for Tauranga, because the whole purpose of the transport system is to support and enable housing. So that's really the purpose of this paper, and we've done everything that we can. We've got all our sub-regional partners on board and agreeing with us, and so we're hoping that A, the government is listening, and B, that we are successful through that National Land Transport funding program. Stephen.
I do agree with your comments, Chair, and I think when it comes down to it, there seems to be a difficulty from a transport investment perspective to understand what you call the nexus between transportation investment and urban growth and development. And it's quite surprising, really, because it's very clear in the GPS that in fact the government is seeking transport investment to enable housing. They specifically say that in the GPS, yet that doesn't seem to have registered yet, at least on the preliminary communications we've had back from NZTA. This project, Cameron Road Stage 2, is really fundamental to the future growth of the city. We know that for Tauranga City alone, we've got to be building about 1,000 homes a year to cope with future demand, 30,000 homes out to 2050. Half of that, roughly, is hoped to come from urban intensification, most of which, 12,000 homes thereabouts, are along Cameron Road. Now, if every one of those new homes on Cameron Road was dependent on a car to get to and from where they're going, the city, I mean, it's already heading to gridlock, but it would be so much worse. And we do need to enable a shift where people can live close to public transport or can indeed walk or cycle to their destination. Cameron Road is by far the best location in the city where that can be achieved. And when you think of all of the services that exist along that road, from the commercial businesses to the professional services, to the university, to the schools, to the supermarkets, all of the and the parks and facilities, all of the amenities along that corridor, Cameron Road Stage 2, linked to Cameron Road Stage 1, and you would only do Cameron Stage 1 if you were also going to do Cameron Road Stage 2. These projects are interdependent. It's vital that we proceed. So the heading of commitment to and funding of transport investment in this corridor to enable housing supply is, I think, fundamental and critically important from the council's perspective. And I think we need to be doing, as we are, everything we can to explain that reality to central government and to the Crown agencies. Otherwise, we will not be able to manage the future growth of the city. And if you take the next step then of the link to the Tauranga West development and the wider Tauranga area, creates an entire corridor of live, work, play from the Tauranga business estate through Cameron Road to the CBD, which is the primary employment zone for the city, across the bridge to the Mount, which is the second most important area, then you can see the full logic of how we grow Tauranga for the future. The first step of which is to get Cameron Road Stage 2 done as soon as we possibly can. So I'm looking forward to hearing back from the government what their response is, and we need to push this as hard as we possibly can, in my view, which I think we're already doing, but the response to date has been slow.
So look, I'm happy to move the recommendations on the first paper, which is we receive the report commitment to and funding of transport investment to enable housing supply, notes that council is unable to fully deliver planned transport investments which enable intensification and greenfield housing land supply, as Susan's just outlined, unless the Crown's funding share commitment is secured, and continues to seek a response from ministers in relation to the letter of best endeavours matters raised in the 29th of April letter from myself to Ministers Willis, Bishop and Brown. Can you second that, Bill? Any further discussion? Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just conscious that the Commission will be considering a paper shortly about Cameron Road Stage 2, and will be considering a decision to proceed with the design work or not, and in doing so would be possibly committing the local ratepayer to significant risk of us not receiving our partnership funding from NZTA. I'm conscious also that we've already made a commitment to spend local funds that aren't subsidised on Turrets and 15th and connecting Monganui. Now, I think as part of this consideration, we need to continue to work with ministers and NZTA on trying to seek their decision not to provide retrospective funding for those two projects, because those two projects are both subject to IFF funding, where our local community is committed to paying the local share. And despite the fact that we've had a signal back and correspondence back, I think we need to continue to persevere with either our approaches to NZTA or, if necessary, using the letter of best endeavours to try and seek that decision by NZTA to agree to retrospective funding of those, should they be accepted, the business cases be accepted and funding be available. I just think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact we've already committed on 2 of those 3 projects, and I think we should continue to persevere to try and seek that funding.
So I assumed that under recommendation C, that's what we were going to continue to do, but do you want it to be more explicit in that we, because it's not just a response from ministers in relation to that. I mean, the letter actually from the Crown says, if we don't get the funding through the NZTA process, they will sit round the table with us and discuss how we get it. That's what we ask them to do in the letter. So under C, do you want to be, because we've just, in relation to the matters raised, but it's really the ongoing, well, it's really the ongoing costs that our ratepayers have incurred because of NZTA's reluctance to fund retrospective funding for projects that they have already agreed went into the mix.
Correct, specific to those TSP programs. So perhaps if we could, in that resolution, see, make it specific to the TSP IFF projects. Sorry about the acronyms.
If you just have continues to seek a response, and also request retrospective funding for the TSP IFF projects.
Well, the difficulty with just requesting funding is that that's not what the letter of best endeavours commits them to. The letter of best endeavours commits them to sitting around the table and talking with us about how we get those funded. So that's what I think we should be pursuing with them, because we need a meeting with them to talk through. NZTA have said no to retrospective funding for those projects. So how do we best protect our ratepayers, because we've taken the risk? So it's continue to seek a response from ministers in relation to the letter of best endeavours matters raised in the 29th of, so I think that can stand, plus matters specific to the Transport System Plan IFF projects.
Including where TCC has, in the interim, funded the Crown share, because that's what you've done.
Including interim TCC funding for Crown projects.
Crown share of those projects.
Crown share of projects, for Crown share. Yeah.
Yep.
That's it. I'm happy to add that as a seconder, happy to add that. I think this is really critical because in good faith, the ratepayers have accepted this levy. This levy comes into force from 1 July. And IFF funding is the government's big way of helping local government through its funding crisis. So it's essential that people have confidence in it. And we've had several ministers come to the city and stand here and say they're going to be standing alongside the incoming council and supporting them. The best way they can do that is by getting around the table and talking through these commitments that have been made. All right, now you two gentlemen have been sitting there quietly through all of this. Is there anything you would like to add?
Chair Tully, no, thank you very much.
Right, anything else? Okay, I'll put that, so that's A, B and C, with the addition in C that we identify those specific TSP, Transport System Plan, IFF projects where the ratepayers have actually funded the Crown's share of that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And that brings us to Cameron Road Stage 2 Urban Transformation Project.
Thank you, and thank you for the context, CJ. This paper does two things. It asks for funding and progression of Cameron Road Stage 2 at our risk, and it touches on the value of the letter of best endeavours. So we're at a point where we need to decide whether to progress detailed design for Cameron Road Stage 2. In October last year, NZTA confirmed 1.4 million to progress that design, and that was to cover our estimate for all costs of it until March this year, which is the time by which the board decision was expected to be made. That now won't happen until June, and the final LLTP decision to be made in September or October time. So the cost risk profile now sits at about $6 million. And last Friday, we received confirmation from NZTA that they'll consider retrospective funding up till $6 million. So two uncertainties remain. One is the approval of the business case, and the second one is the affordability and the NLTP, which is the ranking of the projects and then an affordability line, basically. So those risks do remain, even though they have committed to the consideration. And I think that's an important part, that they don't commit to the funding per se. So the options we have is that to progress all aspects of the design, which is our recommendation in order to deliver the benefits to the community as early as possible, particularly given Commissioner Selwood's point earlier about the importance of the Cameron Road Stage 1 and 2 only together generating the full benefits of Stage 1. Secondly, the second option is to continue with the 3 waters component only in design, which we would have to cover the costs for anyway, or to halt the progress. So that's a sort of a brief summary of it, but we've got Jason and Richard here as the experts, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Basically on the paper, item D under the recommendations really shows where this paper was going to, and they is really asking for the progression of the detailed design for transport and for waters on the back of that letter that was being received on Friday with regards to retrospective funding.
That's the most efficient way to design it. So I'm really pleased to see that this paper's headed Urban Transformation Project, because we battled through Cameron Road Stage 1 that it isn't a transport project. It's actually about transforming that Te Papa corridor, which we call Cameron Road, but is actually much wider than just Cameron Road itself. And this paper sort of sets out that, as well as changing what's visible above ground, and you can see that clearly in Stage 1, underground is a huge amount of changes to the services, like water. Included in here now is power and fibre. These are the required infrastructure for another 12 to 15,000 people who are going to live along that corridor, not necessarily in Cameron Road, but along that Te Papa Peninsula corridor. And without those important services, that's not going to happen, because the pipes are old. Certainly there's probably not enough water and that's probably 2 waters, drinking water and wastewater. We know we've done the flood mapping, we've done the overland stormwater mapping, so we know all that. But we also know that most houses today use an enormous amount of power and are going to use more, and they use fibre for connections. So we have to provide for those services. And if you're digging up the roads to provide all those services, then you may as well do some placemaking on the top of it while you're doing it. And that's the benefit of what you're proposing that we get on and do. Design it all together, so that it's all interlinked. We do it all at once. And we also recognise then that we reap the rewards of stage 1 when we complete stage 2. And as Stephen's outlined, it's a critical part of the logical growth of the city over the next 30 years, is to connect up Tauranga West and that massive industrial estate, which is almost the largest contiguous industrial estate in the country, with the port. And if that, we took that out, 5 public meetings all over the city, explaining all of that to people, and got overwhelming support for that as the logical growth for Tauranga City. So this part of it is critical to enabling all the rest of that to happen. 25,000 houses, which we'll talk about later on, up in Shoan and Ufti, and agreed sub-regionally. So I know it's a risk, but I just think the risk for Tauranga City is greater if we don't do it. And if we stopped and just did the waters, we'd have to come back and do the roading separately, and that just doesn't make sense. So for me, it is logical that we keep going, but that we keep that focus on the fact that whilst Transport are leading it, this is a team effort. This is waters. This is probably private partnership from fibre and power. It is our transport team. It's our spaces and places, which includes our urban foresters, and creating these places where people will gather and live. And that's absolutely critical. So I'm happy to move the recommendations as we've got them on the paper. So we receive the report. We note that NZTA has confirmed consideration of retrospective funding approval of 6.1. And further notes it's not a guarantee of funding, but it's a significant step up from them. And that fund, the NZTA funding being received is subject to both a business case being approved by the board and the project being included in the approved National Land Transport Program. And we progress detailed design of stage 2 for both transport and waters. And I'm assuming that spaces and places are in there as well.
Yes, they are.
Can we mention that so we keep that whole team approach?
Yes, we'll put that in.
So transport, waters and spaces and places. Stephen.
Very happy to second chair for all the reasons I set out in the previous conversation, but I do have a question in relation to the IAF funding, and it's paragraph 30 in our report on page 5. So it says that discussions are underway with MHUD, I presume it is, regarding the required milestones. And there's a sort of a distinction between getting approval through NZTA and whether or not we meet the milestones in the agreed time. So we are at risk of IAF funding if NZTA don't approve this project. And that's clear. So that's $56 million potentially lost to the city if that decision is not in our favour. But are we also at risk if we fail to meet certain timeframes? And can they be negotiated? Because it's fairly central to whether or not we proceed now or not.
So in the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, the IAF funding agreement, there are specific milestones that were aligned to the program that we had for Cameron Road at the time that we entered into it. Because of the GPS and no decisions being made on funding, all of the IAFs throughout New Zealand that are linked to transport have actually got some inter-arrangements in place, because no one can get secured funding at this point, with the intention that once the GPS is finalised, the National Land Transport Program is finalised, and if you've got a project funded, that at that point you would then agree updated milestones that align to that. So say you did get it funded, say you were approved to continue, then you'd update your milestones. They would become your new milestones. And yes, if you don't meet those, so you've failed to deliver, then that does put your funding at risk. And yes, you can renegotiate, but it's not a fait accompli that you would just get it. So minor shifts in timing with good reason would be probably accepted, but if you don't get on and deliver the physical projects, you risk the funding. Or alternatively, if you are unable to get the funding step because NZTA doesn't include your project in the NLTP when it's finalised, then that does put a risk because it's part of an overall agreed funding package and the whole lot needs to be in place for the IAF funding to flow. So we're sitting in an interim holding pattern that's been agreed, saying that we'll relook at it once those calls have been made around September-ish.
On that basis, I mean, it does give you some confidence that given there is so much at stake here, including the government's commitment to IAF, albeit it was the former government, but nevertheless it is in place, the Crown has quite a considerable vested interest. And I think that gives us confidence that we can make this decision today to proceed in the expectation that it will be improved, and especially given the significance of the project. My other question relates, if I may, Chair, to the IFF component of this, which is kind of a similar scenario, that if NZTA do not approve this project, then our IFF funding is also at question, which will result in us having to carry additional costs of failure to draw down the agreement. But I am curious about the flexibility of IFF in that regard, because one would think that even if we couldn't apply IFF for whatever reason to Cameron Road, that we could apply it to other projects, or are they also in the same conundrum?
The answer is yes, we can apply them by going through a process, because the projects are effectively set through an ordering council, therefore there needs to be a variation made to that ordering council. As you know, when we started to see these issues arising, what we did was go back and have a look at the beneficiary analysis to see whether there are other projects that might fall within that. As you just alluded to, though, they are being caught within this as well. So there's still some potential gaps in there. The other thing, and this hasn't been tested, it's only been with officials, but we understand that it is a lengthy and cumbersome process to vary that ordering council. So high level, I wouldn't, I don't know this with certainty, but so I was saying it could be a 4 to 6 month process.
Reallocate.
That's right. Oh, sorry, and Christine's just saying reallocation within caps is also possible, but it needs to ensure the citywide element of the projects remain. So we can't put all money into one project. That needs to be still balanced over the remainder. There can be potentially be some, but not. Yeah, it would need to be all tested.
Well, yeah. So just to add to that, there are criteria under the IFF. So it's not just any project that we should seek to take through that process, but there's a number of criteria that the proposed new projects would have to adhere to, so we can go through that selection process.
More reason then that the letter of expectations process is confirmed by government, because if that situation happens and we don't get the funding, then the letter of best endeavours then has a process whereby we sit down with the government and talk about, so what now, right? How are we going to do this? Given, and I think the strength to our arm is that they are focused on that IFF funding as a major assistance to local government, and if it isn't working, then no one else will pick it up, and they'll continue to get requests for a whole heap of money, which they don't have.
So in essence, we have, I think, 3 imperatives for us to make a decision in favour of committing this money. One is that it's a really important project for the city and we really can't afford to delay it. The second is that it also has significant funding coming from IAF. And the third is it has another tranche of funding coming from IFF, all of which would give you confidence that the right decision on this project will be made in due course.
You have that confidence? We are about to test that. And in fairness and seriousness, the confidence we have is the work that we've done over the last 3.5 years with particularly the agencies in Wellington, the Crown agencies in Wellington. I think NZTA certainly understand our difficulties. I think HUD certainly understands our difficulties, and that's the nexus between housing and transport. And then the work that we've done with ministers in both the previous government and the current government. So I think they understand. It would be good to see some action for the incoming council to give them confidence that the woes for the 5th largest city in New Zealand, and possibly one of the most important cities to New Zealand Inc. from a import-export position, is able to grow in a way that is sensible and managed. Anything else? Bill, you look as if, yeah. Question? Okay. Shad? Yeah. Just reassure anyone listening that we have made these, made it clear to government who want to use this IFF funding tool, this infrastructure funding and financing tool more widely, that we have made it very clear to them the changes that need to be made to the legislation to give it much more flexibility. The answer is yes. Okay, all right. I think we've done it to death probably. So I'm going to put the recommendations. We've got the addition of spaces and places in D to make it clear that this is a wide council team involved in this urban transformation project. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So the last remaining item in open is Plan Change 33. We'll come back to that after lunch. At this stage, we'll go into committee. I've done all the open items. Yeah. We'll go into committee. And would someone like to give me move a motion that we go into committee, into public excluded, sorry, for the reasons outlined in the agenda. Bill's moved and Shad seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much.